Chapter 449. This process could be repeated from dozens to hundreds of times, depending on the user's requirements. Generally speaking, the longer the forging time, the better the quality of the weapon. The so-called refined steel referred to the removal of impurities from the metal during the forging process, resulting in a fine weapon. However, the materials used by Andre were high-quality steel, at least in this world, so there was no need to refine it so many times. Moreover, it was an experimental item, so there was no need to spend so much effort on it. Forging, especially in Orier where productivity was lagging behind, had always been a time-consuming and laborious task. At the same time, it also required the corresponding skills. Otherwise, a 1-kilogram piece of raw iron ingot would only cost a few silver coins, but a weapon like a longsword would cost more than 10 gold coins. The price had increased by more than 10 times, which showed how much effort the blacksmith had put in. From about 10 o'clock in the morning until midnight, everyone was busy for the whole day. Even their lunch and dinner were sent to the blacksmith shop by Fiona. After eating a few mouthfuls, they continued to immerse themselves in forging. It was a full moon tonight. When the full moon rose to the highest point in the sky, Andre finally completed the last quenching. He sat down on the ground and sighed while panting. Damn it, it's done. My arms are so tired that I can't even lift them up. Take out the dagger and let me have a look. I hope my sweat and efforts were not in vain. Hee hee, you've worked hard. Do you want me to give you a thank you kiss? Bosha, with a pair of plump breasts that did not match her short stature, came over and teased him with a smile. Andre looked down at his dirty upper body and shook his head with a wry smile. Forget it, I'm sweating so much that even I feel uncomfortable. Let's talk about it after I take a bath. Although the kiss of the big-breasted lowly was very tempting, he thought about the sour smell on his body and decided to talk about it later. After all, she had caused a big mess this time and would have to hide for at least a month or two. There was still a long way to go. Bosha blinked her eyes mischievously and the corner of her mouth curled up slightly. She pretended to be regretful and said, "Oh, what a pity. Let me make it clear in advance. It's not that I didn't express my gratitude, but that you didn't accept it. Don't regret it. All right, stop messing around. Let's see the quality of the weapon first." As he spoke, Andre took the unsharpened dagger from Mabel's hands. He carefully wiped the dagger repeatedly with a linen cloth. Soon, the silver-white blade and the beautiful patterns on it were revealed. This weapon was 35 centimeters long, 4 centimeters wide, and 1 centimeter thick. It basically did not have any curves and was a standard straight knife. Only the tip was made into a small horn, and one side was sharpened. It could be used for both slashing and stabbing. It was very suitable for thieves who liked to ambush. With its sharpness after sharpening, it could easily tear through most armors and drink the enemy's blood. Wow, what a beautiful weapon. Quick, let me try. Seeing the full appearance of the dagger, Portia immediately rushed forward and hugged it in her arms. She caressed it lovingly and felt the slight coolness coming from it. She then held it in her hands and waved it repeatedly. Soon, a pleasantly surprised expression appeared on her face. As a thief who had stolen countless treasures, her eyes had been trained to the point where she could discern the value of an item just by looking at it. Obviously, the dagger in his hand right now was definitely the best of the best. Excluding rare magical metals such as mithril, adamantine, and cold iron, with the current steel forging technology on the continent, only a very small number of dwarven forging masters who had a special sensitivity to metals could forge a better product than this dagger. But it was a pity that most dwarves lived in the lowlands or in the mountains. Unless it was necessary for trade, they would not easily appear in the sight of humans. Only a very small number of ancient families who had established friendship with the dwarves for generations could obtain a small number of weapons and armors personally forged by the dwarves. This was especially true for weapons that were enchanted with unique secret runes. They often had various abilities, such as a war hammer that could return to the user's hand after being thrown, or a long spear that could tear apart the sturdy scales of a dragon with a single strike. Even the king would drool over them. An ordinary person might not even be able to catch a glimpse of them in their lifetime. In fact, Andre had seen a book on forging in a necromancer's private library. Most of the records came from a dwarven tribe with the surname Gaoshan from hundreds of years ago. It was a genuine dwarven craftsmanship. Even if it was only at the beginner level, it could still leave 90% of human blacksmiths in the dust. In addition, it was refined using the most scientific method and repeatedly forged using the steel clamping method. Naturally, it would not be too bad. What a good dagger. It's 100 times better than any other dagger I've seen. I believe that once it's sharpened, it will be able to easily cut through a piece of wood as thick as a wrist. After carefully examining the hardness and toughness of the dagger, Mabel couldn't help but sigh. As one of the blacksmiths, she felt an unprecedented satisfaction at this moment. It was as if she had gone out to sea for the first time and had finally caught her first fish after working for 4 hours. Those who had never experienced it would never be able to understand. As for the big-breasted lowly, she seemed to have gone crazy. She hugged the dagger and laughed nonstop. The light emitted from her eyes was even brighter than all the stars in the night sky. Ha 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 ha! I'm so lucky. First, I escaped safely after a bounty was placed on my head. Now I've gotten such a sharp dagger for free. I've decided, from now on, I'll call you Thief's Friend, my most beloved dagger. After finishing her crazy speech, she reluctantly returned the dagger that was named Thief's Friend to Andre. Although the weapon had been forged, it still needed to be sharpened. It would take at least a few days to a dozen days. The finer the grinding, the greater the might of the weapon. Some famous daggers were even polished by the best craftsmen for an entire month. However, Andre didn't intend to personally do such a time-consuming and laborious task. He casually tossed the dagger back to Mabel and pointed to the whetstone placed in the corner. This weapon already belongs to you, so you'll have to do the rest yourself. I believe that you know how to sharpen the weapon. After I've finished sharpening it, I'll do some processing. It's best that you prepare some diamond dust in advance. If you don't have it, I personally suggest that you grind 2 diamonds together to obtain it. Diamond dust? What do you want it for? Portia asked in puzzlement. Chapter 450. It's a secret I can't tell you yet. Just treat it as a surprise, Andre replied, pretending to be profound. Even though he'd temporarily lost his powers as a mage, he could still engrave a magic formation and pray to the god of forging to enchant a weapon in his current state. In Orire, not all magic weapons, armor, and equipment needed to be enchanted with arcane or divine spells. Some rituals could be used instead, and he just so happened to have one in his possession, the weapon enchantment, sharpness. Just like the fire enchantment and the hardening enchantment, this recipe was also obtained from a large-scale mission, the Trade War. Its effect was just as its name suggested. It could make a weapon sharper and even cut through other weapons of the same material. The Magic Association of Linton City had a similar recipe, but the effect was only half as good. Because it was an entry-level enchantment, there was no need to cast any spells. All that was needed was a simple ritual and incantation, and a magic formation engraved on the weapon would automatically absorb the magic energy in the air through the energy produced by the diamond dust, completing the entire process. As for the specific effects, that would depend on how much diamond dust was used during the ritual. Generally speaking, the more diamond dust was used, the sharper the weapon would be, and it would be easy for it to pierce through standard armor. Seeing that it was already past midnight, the exhausted Andre wasn't in the mood to chat with the other 2 overly excited fellows. He went to the water tank alone and used the water stored inside to wash off the dirt on his body. After that, he lay down on the simple wooden bed and fell asleep. There were still many things waiting for him to do tomorrow. One had to know that opening a blacksmith shop wasn't just for fun. It was to create high-quality weapons and armor to attract the attention of smugglers, and then use them to send news back to Linton City that he was still alive. Even if he failed in the end, he could use this as a foundation to safely survive the month and a half of being sealed as a mage. This also meant that in the coming days, he had to quickly produce good products and send them to Valen City for sale, and he had to guarantee the quantity. Otherwise, a few handfuls wouldn't even make a splash in Chaos City, where tens of thousands of people lived. Andre's mind was filled with all sorts of messy thoughts as he listened to the conversation between the big-breasted Lowly and Mabel. It did not take long for him to enter his dream. Once again, he dreamed of that strange eye staring at him, but this time he didn't remember it as clearly as last time. It was as if he had fallen into a state of sleepwalking. He spent the entire night in a daze, and even when he opened his eyes the next morning, he still couldn't remember what had happened in the dream. Because of the sufficient food reserves, Mabel didn't engage in this trade for more than 10 years, other than occasionally going out to catch some fresh fish to taste. Every day, she stayed in the blacksmith shop to help out and learn some forging skills at the same time. Andre had long regarded the siblings as his own people, so he did not hide anything from them and taught them everything he knew. In just a few days, Mabel had been promoted from an odd-job worker who could only do manual labor to a blacksmith apprentice who could create rough materials. Of course, he himself wasn't idle either. He forged weapons at the speed of 2 long swords and 2 scimitars every day. In any case, there was no need for the mass-produced items to be too fine. As long as the hardness and toughness were up to standard, there wouldn't be a problem. At the same time, he also used his free time to make a few pairs of gloves. The craftsmanship of these gloves wasn't complicated. He just had to sew a few pieces of 3-layered steel plates on the back of the leather gloves. At a critical moment, it could be used to block swords or arrows. Although the possibility of being pierced through was still very high, at least it wouldn't be fatal. Furthermore, in order to ensure that the flexibility of the fingers was not affected, the steel plates weren't made in one piece. Instead, they were woven together in a crisscross pattern, and rivets were inserted at the end. The moment these gloves appeared, it immediately attracted Portia's interest. After a simple trial, she became Andre's first customer and gave many suggestions for improvement. Only a day later, the second pair of gloves were freshly made. Not only were there a few more protruding spikes on the back of the hands, but the joints were also serrated. If one was accidentally hit in the face, there was a 100% chance that one's face would be disfigured. Days passed, and in the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. The dagger, which had been repeatedly polished, had a sharp edge. Finally, the day of enchantment had arrived. The big-breasted Lowly, who had always been very attentive to her weapons, handed the polished dagger and diamond dust to Andre early in the morning. Then, she stood quietly at the side, waiting to see what kind of surprise it would be. Andre didn't hold back. He directly heated up the dagger's body and began to carefully carve complex patterns on it. After more than 2 hours, he barely completed the preliminary supply and demand. He even made a blood-release groove on the dagger so that the moment the dagger was inserted into the body, the opponent would bleed incessantly. Even if it wasn't immediately fatal, just a large amount of blood loss could lead to death. After doing all this, Andre carefully drew a strange pattern on the ground with the blood of the seabirds. Then he stood in the center, raised the diamond dust in his hand into the air, and loudly chanted a jerky incantation. The diamond dust that fell from the sky seemed to be attracted by some kind of force and flew toward the patterns carved on the dagger. The whole process was completed in just a few seconds. Not even a speck of dust could escape his summoning. The moment the ritual was completed, he could feel a part of the life force in his body being sucked away. He instantly fell into a state of exhaustion and fell to the ground with a thud. Oh my God, what's wrong with you?" Portia, who had been watching from a distance, hurried over and carefully helped Andre up. Her face was full of concern. I'm fine. It's just that I've used up too much energy. I'll be fine after some rest. Quick, take a look at the dagger. I don't want any accidents to happen to the weapon that I've spent so much effort to create." Andre said weakly as he looked at the information that appeared in his vision. His heart was filled with bitterness. Successfully forged magical weapon, +1 dagger, thief's friend, enchantment attribute, sharpness, difficulty appraisal, easy, forcibly drained 30 HP. This is the first magical item that you've successfully forged. Rewarded ability, intermediate forging. Congratulations! Your beginner forging has been upgraded to intermediate forging. In the future, You can enchant weapons and armor with higher levels of magic. After reading these notifications, he finally understood why those famous blacksmiths rarely forged magical weapons and armor. Even the most prolific dwarven blacksmiths did not forge more than 50 of them, and only one of them was powerful. The reason was simple. For such an enchantment ritual that did not use arcane or divine spells, it would drain the creator's life force every time. If one was not careful, they could lose their lives. Chapter 451. Picking up the dagger that was glowing with a faint white light from the ground, Portia opened her mouth wide in surprise, her jaw almost dropping to the ground. She stared at the blade in disbelief. Her finger gently slid across the edge of the blade, and a wound was instantly cut open. Under the effect of gravity, the blood droplet quickly slid to the tip of the dagger and fell to the ground with a thud, without the slightest bit of stagnation. This is a magic weapon. The big-breasted lowly gasped and exclaimed loudly. Andre smiled and nodded. That's right, a +1 dagger. The weapon attribute is sharpness. I believe you've already seen how sharp it is. Even full body armor would find it difficult to withstand it. Put away. Later, I'll ask Mabel for sharkskin to make a scabbard. Otherwise, the light it emits will be too conspicuous. In this world, there is a huge gap between enchanted weapons and ordinary weapons. No matter how well the latter was forged, it was still just ordinary goods. No matter whether it was in terms of performance or value, it could not be compared to the former. The so-called +1 referred to the level of enchantment. Generally speaking, before enchantment, all weapons would not have this bonus. Only rare magical metals, such as adamantine, mithril, and cold iron, could be forged into weapons or armor and were naturally classified as magical weapons. However, ordinary steel, even if the dwarven master forger came, would not be able to become +1. According to the calculation methods left behind by the fallen magical civilization, +1 weapons usually only had one aspect that was outstanding. It could be especially sharp or sturdy. After being stabbed, it would produce magic effects such as immobilization, paralysis, and bleeding. It could also be enhanced with some kind of elemental damage, such as fire, poison, strong acid, lightning, negative energy, and so on. Moreover, the additional attributes were not very exaggerated. However, starting from +2 weapons, a certain proportion of special metals must be mixed in to make it have better magic guidance. At the same time, the number and ability of enchantment would also be significantly increased. It would be enough to easily tear apart all non-magical armor and armor. Starting from +3, they were considered high-grade enchanted weapons. Usually, each of them had a famous name, and there were even legends that matched them. Many bards and heroes used such weapons. One of them was the Sword of the King's Blood, which was obtained from the underground labyrinth. It was a +3 weapon. As for +4 weapons, they began to break away from the category of mortals and were also called secondary legendary weapons. Even the most outstanding blacksmith master among the dwarves could only forge one in his lifetime. Moreover, he had to be enlightened. Both were indispensable. After this work was completed, the blacksmith would not pick up the hammer for the rest of his life. This was because he had integrated all his passion, talent, and skills into the weapon. He no longer had the slightest thought of forging. At the same time, the power of this weapon was also very strong. It had an enchantment called beheading. Once it was activated, it could directly cut off the target's head, completely ignoring the armor. It was a complete instant kill. +5 weapons were legendary weapons through and through. There were very few weapons of this level in the whole of Orire. Every time they appeared, it would attract countless people to fight over them. Wars broke out between countries because of them. Even the gods spied on how powerful they were and sent out all their churches. Legendary weapons were so powerful and so rare. It was possible for powerful people to harm the gods with them. Therefore, almost every one of them was in the hands of a powerful master. Only a few were lost in the long river of history, waiting for the fated people to find them. In fact, the limit of what mortals could do was to forge +5 legendary weapons. Above that was the domain of the gods. +6 weapons were called secondary divine weapons, and +7 weapons were real divine weapons. Only the gods had the ability to make them. In the thousands of years of history of this world, countless gods had died for various reasons. Some of them had descended into the material world with their bodies, and then were killed by lunatics who wanted to decipher the mysteries of the gods and replace them. The weapons they used fell in some corner of the continent. That was a treasure that even the current gods were coveting. In the Great War hundreds of years ago, there was a group of people who used a divine artifact called the Pearl of Death to directly kill the dancing goddess, Shia. From this, one could see how terrifying its power was. Of course, things of this level were not something that Andre could come into contact with. At most, he could make some +2 magical weapons. +3 weapons could only be made after the seal of the mage profession was lifted. As for +4 weapons, he would only have a glimmer of hope when his forging ability reached the advanced level. However, for Borsha, this +1 dagger was precious enough. It was even worth risking her life for. Therefore, she excitedly jumped in the blacksmith shop. Finally, she rushed forward and kissed Andre on the cheek. Then, she pounced on him and kept rubbing her head against him. Ha ha! Great! It's simply great! Gond, I didn't expect you to be a blacksmith with the ability to forge magical weapons. I love you to death. The big-breasted lowly shouted incoherently as she buried Andre's face between her plump breasts. Her eyes were full of excitement. Ugh, 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 damn it, let go of me. I can't breathe. Andre struggled desperately to get out of the soft and bouncy place. He took in large mouthfuls of fresh air. He had almost become the first transmigrator in history to be suffocated to death by a woman's breasts. Borsha, who found that she had gone a little overboard, quickly let go of her hands. She smiled awkwardly and spread her hands. Sorry, I was a little too excited and didn't notice your reaction. Andre helplessly glanced at her slightly trembling weapon. He recalled the benefits he had just received and shook his head with a wry smile. So I forget it. Just this once. Hee, thanks. In order to repay you for making such a great dagger for me, I've decided to serve you 3 times for free. It doesn't matter what kind of service it is. Don't miss this opportunity. The big-breasted lowly deliberately emphasized the word service. Then, she playfully blinked her eyes and deliberately pulled down her neckline, revealing a large expanse of snow-white scenery and the unfathomable cleavage in the middle. There was no doubt that this was naked seduction. For those with special hobbies and lolicons, it was a fatal temptation. Even if they weren't, they would more or less have some physiological reaction. Chapter 452. Unfortunately, Andre wasn't one of them. Although his mouth was a little dry after seeing this scene, it wasn't to the point of lust taking over his brain. After calming himself down, a playful expression quickly appeared on his face. He purposely put on a perverted expression and asked, Really? Hee. Of course it's fake. I'm not one of those prostitutes. If you have any physiological needs, I can introduce you to a few of the best in Valen City. I guarantee you'll be high as hell. But since I've taken the benefits, I'll help you with a few things, such as stealing, assassinating, and stealing information. Just let me know if you need anything. After saying that, Bosha pulled her collar up again. Her eyes revealed a hint of a smile that would only appear after a successful prank. It was obvious that as the king of thieves in Valen City of Sin, she had a good understanding of the matters between men and women and was also proficient in seduction techniques. However, she didn't have any actual combat experience. Otherwise, she wouldn't have refused to use a few sexual services in exchange for the ownership of a magical weapon. One had to know that Aurare's concept of chastity was very weak, and they were very open when it came to men and women. Many noble ladies and madams in Linton City judged who was the most attractive based on the number of lovers they had. There were also some socialites in the city who had played with more than 4 digits of men. According to the universal values of Earth, it could be described as completely shocking. But the more such women were, the more they were sought after by the noble men. Everyone took pride in being able to share a bed with them, and there were a few who could successfully become the legal spouse of a great noble or even a king. When Andre first heard of these things, he was so shocked that his jaw dropped. He didn't understand at all what was in the minds of the nobles. Weren't they afraid of getting sick if they were so promiscuous? But this was the general trend of society. Even Countess Anasta of Western Xia, who was relatively clean, maintained intimate relationships with at least 5 or 6 noblemen. 3 of them were dukes of Linton City, and the rest were even more unsightly. Some even regularly participated in naked banquets and orgies. Just from a name alone, one would know what kind of shady business they were involved in. Fortunately, Chloe still had these bad habits. Otherwise, Andre would never have agreed to the marriage. If the upper class was like this, the lower class would naturally not be any better. Many village girls, for a few copper coins, or for a passing traveler, would have a good time at the other party in the woods. If the big-breasted lowly had really tasted the forbidden fruit, then she definitely wouldn't have refused to spend the night with a handsome young man. However, she had refused at the critical moment, which meant that she must be one of the few women in Valen City who kept themselves clean. Thinking of this, Andre couldn't help but secretly admire the short man in front of him who was only half his height. After all, she had lived in such an environment for many years. Not only was she able to maintain her virginity, but she was also not blinded by the darkest side of the world. She still maintained her conscience and was definitely worthy of respect. After tidying up his messy hair, Andre slowly climbed up from the ground and shook off the dust on his body. He lowered his voice and said, "Since that's the case, I just so happen to have something I need your help with. Tomorrow morning, Mabel will be bringing the weapons and armor that she forged a few days ago to Valen City to sell. I'm a bit worried because he hasn't come into contact with this before. Can you follow him in the shadows and at least guarantee his safety? It doesn't matter if the goods are lost or not. They're just mass-produced goods and haven't been enchanted yet. I'm just testing the market's reaction. Also, here's a list of materials, most of which are needed to forge magic weapons and armor. Whether you buy or steal them, try to bring back as much as possible. I can use them to make a few pieces of armor, and I'll guarantee that you'll get a share." After he finished speaking, he took out a piece of parchment from his pocket. There were over 30 types of raw materials written on it, all of which were necessities for enchantment without casting any spells. As an ace thief, Portia was one of the very few non-illiterate people in Valen City who could read and write the common language. Because she often needed to identify the value of an item when she was stealing, she had specially gone to learn from someone for a period of time and was able to understand the list recorded on the parchment. However, knowing didn't mean understanding. Understanding was one thing, knowing was another. For most people, just a long list of technical terms was enough to make the self-proclaimed erudite nobles dizzy. If one hadn't been in the business of magical materials for a long time, it was almost impossible to match the names of tens of thousands of materials with the actual items. After all, not everyone had the frightening intelligence and memory of an adept mage. Thus, the corner of the large-breasted lowly's mouth twitched slightly. She pointed at the names on the list and shouted, "Can you explain the second half of the list? Were these things, especially the tongue of a straightest toad, the hair of a demonic beast, and the toes of an ogre? Where am I supposed to find them? You have to know that I don't even know what a straightest toad or a demonic beast is." Even though she had purposely shouted the last few sentences to emphasize her anger, her baby face didn't make one think of her as angry. On the contrary, it gave off a very cute feeling. Andre didn't mind the other party's bad attitude at all. He smiled and shrugged as he explained, "Haha, relax, don't get agitated. The straightest toad is a humanoid creature that lives in the sea of chaos and is related to frogs by blood. It has very high intelligence, and its tongue is very long, making it a very good enchantment material. As for the demonic beast, it is an evil otherworldly creature. It looks similar to a human, but has the head of feline. Moreover, the palm and the back of the hand are inverted. Due to the high magic resistance of these otherworldly creatures, they can bestow additional attributes to armor, shields, and other defensive equipment. Lastly, The toe of an ogre is a commonly used material in enchantment. It can increase the attributes of a weapon. These three items are relatively rare. Ordinary merchants won't have them, so you'd better directly sneak into the residence of the strongest smugglers and investigate. If they have them, you'll definitely find them. If not, then forget it. Believe me, as long as these things are very conspicuous, you'll be able to recognize them at first sight. Ever since he knew that he couldn't use the power of a mage for 1.5 months, he had been thinking about increasing his survivability. With the help of the system, as long as he obtained the relevant knowledge of the profession, he would be able to immediately gain a level of that profession. He could totally consider taking on a part-time job. Since he wanted to take on a part-time job, he had to prepare some equipment in advance so that he could quickly transform it into a powerful fighting force. Chapter 453. Among all the professions in Orire, part-time professions were a very common phenomenon, especially the veteran adventurers who often appeared in the dangerous wilderness. It was common to see a combination of warriors and rogues, warriors and priests, rogues and rangers. It was not that they did not want to focus on the development of their professions, but for their own needs, they wanted to maximize the survival rate in dangerous situations. To give the simplest example, when an adventurer went deep into the ruins to explore, he suddenly found a trap that had to be removed in order to move forward. At this time, he would need the skills of a rogue or a bard to remove traps, otherwise he would not be able to move forward. Similarly, when a rogue was besieged by enemies, he would need the strong physique and fighting ability of a warrior. This was because rogues were good at sneak attacks, pickpocketing, scouting, stealth, and setting and removing traps. Once discovered, they would instantly lose their biggest reliance. Under such circumstances, more than 90% of people would choose 1 or 2 part-time professions to make up for the shortcomings of their main profession. Although spellcasters rarely had part-time professions, because the spellcasting level not only determined the power of the spell, but also the number of spell slots, so part-time professions were equivalent to a waste of energy. However, the current situation was a little special. If he did not obtain a certain amount of combat power as soon as possible, it was very likely that he would not be able to send a message back. Andre did not think that after killing the 5 punks led by Edmund, he would be able to live peacefully on Turtle Island for a month and a half. Once the pirate ship called Seawolf came to pick up the new members, trouble would soon follow. At that time, a fierce battle would be unavoidable. It would be strange if Mabel, who had not become a level 1 warrior, the halfling rogue, Portia, and Fiona, who had no combat experience, could stop them. However, based on his current knowledge of various professions and the limitations of his own race, there were not many choices he could make. Among them, a warrior was the simplest and most violent one. As a descendant of the fire elementals, the passion of a warrior flowed in his blood, so there was no penalty in terms of EXP. However, if he chose another profession as a part-time profession, there would be a penalty more or less, such as a reduction of EXP by a certain percentage. A long time ago, Andre had experimented and found that the more part-time professions, the more severe the EXP penalty. At most, it could even reduce EXP by more than half. Therefore, he had never considered part-time professions, but now he was completely forced to do so. Do not underestimate warriors just because they're the most numerous class in the world. As a professional warrior, even if they were only level 1, they had to master how to wear and use all kinds of armor, including helmets, all types of armor, gloves and wrist guards, shields, knee guards, and so on. They also had to be proficient in using all kinds of weapons, from sharp weapons like long swords, short swords, scimitars, daggers, and spears to blunt weapons like war hammers, spiked hammers, flails, and meteor hammers. They also had to have short bows, longbows, crossbows, catapults, and other long-range weapons. In other words, warriors were like omnipotent supermen when it came to weapons and armor. No matter what they got their hands on, they would be able to use it skillfully. There was no need to worry about dropping the ball at a critical moment. As their level increased, they could also learn many specialties, including blind battle, whirlwind attack, barehanded strike, violent attack, cleave, collision, disarm, battle reflex, and so on. Coupled with a set of excellent magic equipment, they could be called a battlefield meat grinder. Even if they were surrounded by dozens of people, they could rely on their combat skills and abundant stamina to achieve the final victory. Of course, everything had its pros and cons. Although warriors were considered outstanding among melee professions, it was a little difficult to cooperate with the mage profession. If they wore armor, it meant that they had to give up on casting spells. If they did not wear armor, it also meant that they had to give up the advantage of high armor. In addition, the low strength attribute was also an important factor. As everyone knew, the amount of strength was one of the most important standards to measure the strength of a warrior. Usually, the greater the strength, the faster the speed of the weapon, and the stronger the destructive power. Moreover, they could also use two-handed axes, heavy warhammers, and other terrifying weapons that could cripple or kill the opponent if they hit the target. Often, they could kill the opponent who did not have enough strength in a few rounds. Andre's strength was only 7 points. Even with the Fire Elemental Prince's strength, it was only 12 points. It was equivalent to a coolie who was responsible for transporting goods at the dock. There was no way he could really fight against those strong men who were more than 8 meters tall and weighed more than 80 kilograms. It was precisely because of this point that he had prepared a second choice for himself, which was the rogue swordsman. This was a special profession that was a little between a thief and a warrior. It was good at using all kinds of light weapons, such as short swords, daggers, scimitars, rapiers, and rapiers. During the battle, through careful calculation, the rogue swordsman could predict the next step, or even the next few steps, accurately find the fatal point and attack. It could be said that this was a profession that leaned towards the intelligence and agility attributes. Not only did it require a smart brain, but it also required an extremely sharp reflexes. The slightest mistake could make a fool of oneself. Without a doubt, this was a profession that was really suitable for Andre. The only drawback was that he had to bear the corresponding experience penalty. Unless he invested a lot of experience points to level up the rogue swordsman to the same level as a mage, he would enjoy the penalty of 20% of all experience points. Obviously, Andre only wanted to level up the rogue swordsman so that he would not be completely helpless in times of crisis. He had no intention of leveling it up at all. After all, according to the system prompt, although leveling up to level 1 did not require any experience points, if he wanted to use experience points to level up, then he had to use the experience points of the profession with the highest level. For example, now that he was level 9 mage, if he wanted to level up the rogue swordsman, then he would have to use the experience points of a level 9 to level 10 mage to level up. Unless his brain was clamped by a door, otherwise, only an idiot would make such a stupid decision. However, the rogue swordsman did not have to rely on experience points to level up. It could also be like the original inhabitants of this world, honing the skills of the profession through continuous battles and adventures to finally level up. But unfortunately, even if Andre put all his energy into the rogue swordsman, he would not be able to catch up with the mage's leveling speed. So now he was faced with a dilemma. Chapter 454. Should I bear a portion of the experience penalty and choose the most suitable subclass? Or should I not bear the experience penalty and choose a slightly weaker subclass? It had to be said that anyone would find it difficult to make a choice at this moment. Every choice concerned their life and future, so no matter how cautious they were, it would not be too much. Even though he had yet to make a final choice, Andre was already preparing to forge a few suitable weapons and armor for himself. At the same time, he was also preparing a set of equipment for Mabel, who had shown her talent as a berserker. If the following development was as expected, then they would have to be prepared to fight and escape. Andre didn't think that they would be able to win against an entire ship of pirates without being able to use magic abilities, wands, scrolls, and most magical items. His plan was to immediately take everyone to hide in the shrubbery behind the island as soon as they discovered the pirate ship around the island. They would use the complicated terrain to engage in guerrilla warfare, and then take advantage of the chaos to take a ship from the other side of the beach to Whalen City. He would think of a way to take advantage of the chaotic situation in the city to get a ship to return to Linton City, or send out the news and wait for reinforcements. Of course, The above was the worst-case scenario. Perhaps Edmund hadn't truly received the recognition of the pirate group, or perhaps the pirates had forgotten about him as time passed. In any case, it was always better to be prepared. Seeing that the conversation had reached this point, Bosha couldn't decline and could only helplessly sigh. "All right, I'll give it a try, but you'd better not have too much hope. The underground guilds of Wayland City are still looking for me everywhere. I definitely can't appear in public unless it's nighttime." In fact, she herself didn't want to return to Wayland City at this particular time. Even though it had been 3 weeks since the bounty was announced, there were definitely still many people who hadn't given up and were still searching everywhere. Therefore, the danger hadn't disappeared, but had instead become even more concealed. I've already considered this point. Here, these are 2 bottles of invisibility potion. You can completely disappear from the enemy's sight within a few seconds after drinking them. I believe that with your level of silent movement, escaping with ease shouldn't be a problem. Saying this, Andre took out the magic potions he had prepared and handed them to Bosha. As a mage who liked to be fully prepared for everything, how could he let such a cute lowly risk her life for no reason? He definitely had a series of meticulous plans. Invisibility potion. Staring at the flashing liquid within the potion bottle, Bosha raised her eyebrows in surprise. She quickly snatched the bottle over and carefully pulled out the cork. She wrinkled her nose and sniffed lightly. A strange look quickly appeared in her eyes. She sized up the young man, standing in front of her from head to toe with a suspicious expression on her face. "First, you're a blacksmith who can forge magical weapons. Now, you can take out precious magical potions. Who exactly are you?" In this world, no one who could become a professional was an idiot. If you treated others as idiots, you would soon find that you had already become an idiot in the eyes of others. Bosha, who had lived in Valen City for more than a decade, had seen all kinds of schemes with her own eyes. She had also experienced countless betrayals and plots. Her usual innocent and cute appearance was, to a certain extent, a disguise to protect herself. After all, most people would subconsciously lower their guard when facing a sweet, pure, and beautiful halfling. This way, she would be able to get closer to her target and steal. It was obvious that Andre's endless methods, as well as his maturity and meticulous thinking that didn't match his age, had raised the vigilance of the big-breasted lowly. There were only 11 official mages in the Sardinia Islands controlled by the pirates. More than half of them were beginner spellcasters hovering around the 3rd level. Thus, it was basically a magic desert. Moreover, there were very few priests. Apart from a simple temple in Valen City dedicated to the goddess of the sea, there was only a temple for the goddess of wealth built by smugglers. The goddess of the sea was inclined towards evil. She often set off huge waves and violent storms, forcing the sailors to offer sacrifices. Thus, the burning and looting style of the pirates was very much in line with her wishes. The goddess of wealth was even more so. Wherever merchants gathered, there would definitely be a temple for her. Although she was a neutral god, she often helped criminals dispose of their stolen goods and even openly protected smugglers. She was deeply worshipped and revered by the majority of unscrupulous merchants. The only regret was that there were less than 10 priests in both temples. Although they weren't the lowest level altars, there wasn't much difference. The amount of holy water, healing potions, and divine spells that could be provided every day was pitifully low. Naturally, it was unlikely that they would enter the market. In such an environment, a young blacksmith who could forge magical weapons suddenly appeared and easily took out 3 bottles of level 2 magic potions, invisibility potions. Anyone who wasn't an idiot would be suspicious. Andre had already expected this situation. He calmly moved his numb arms, bent down, and asked playfully, "Then who do you think I am? You definitely aren't a pirate. Otherwise, with your current forging skills, you can get everything you want from the Pirate King, Francis. Since you aren't a friend, you must be an enemy. I guess the name Gond is also fake." Portia also raised the corner of her mouth slightly and asked back without showing any weakness. The distance between the two was very close. If they were to move forward a little more, their noses would almost touch each other. However, she didn't show any fear at all. Instead, she appeared to be a little excited. Perhaps it was because of the strong curiosity of the halfling, or perhaps it was because she didn't feel any danger from Andre, so the big-breasted lowly didn't put on any defensive posture and looked at him without blinking. That's right. Gond is indeed a fake name used to hide my identity. As for my real name, it's not convenient to tell you now. If you're willing to help me play this show to the end, you will naturally know all the truth. However, you are much smarter than I thought, and your intuition is also very sharp. Your future will definitely be limitless. How about it? If you're not interested in joining my team, I promise that there will be all kinds of exciting adventures. You will never feel bored. Andre wasn't embarrassed, panicked, or shocked by his identity being exposed at all. He openly admitted that he used a fake name and even took the initiative to extend a hand to recruit her. Chapter 455. What is this? Is it a cover-up, a lie, or do you have any intentions towards me? Portia glanced at the large hand in front of her. She did not choose to shake it, nor did she choose to turn around and leave. It was as if she was waiting for an answer or a reason to convince herself to stay. Andre, who had always had a clear understanding of human nature, keenly captured the desire that flashed in her eyes. He smiled and shook his head. No, it's not that. I'm currently in a weakened state and need a capable helper and partner. You happen to meet all the requirements. On one hand, you have unlimited potential. On the other hand, your character is not bad. You happen to be in between good and evil. You have your own set of moral standards, which suits my taste. Of course, this is not a forced arrangement. You can choose to join for a period of time to experience it. If you're not satisfied, you can leave at any time. How about it? Do you want to give it a try? The big-breasted lowly obviously did not expect the conditions to be so lax. She was slightly taken aback at first. Then, she lowered her head and thought for a few minutes. She then stretched out her nimble little hand and shook Andre's large hand. For the sake of the magical weapons and potions. Deal. But I have to say this in advance. If there is an especially dangerous situation, I will run away. No problem. I wish us a pleasant cooperation. Seeing that this matter was finally resolved smoothly, Andre quickly revealed a faint smile. He really needed a helper now, especially a thief who could silently sneak into certain special areas. One must know that if the items on the list were to be bought with money, it would be impossible to buy them without tens of thousands of gold coins. But if it were to be stolen, it would be much easier. Remember, don't ever cheat me behind my back. Otherwise, even if I have to chase you to the ends of the earth, I will not let you go. Perhaps because she had been betrayed by a friend in the past, Portia gave a half-true and half-false warning at the end. From her sharp eyes, one could tell that she was definitely not joking. However, Andre never had such intentions, so he shrugged indifferently. Don't worry. I can swear that if there is really any conspiracy against you, I will definitely die under the cruelest punishment in the world. As soon as he finished speaking, a white translucent light shone in from the window, forming a golden radiance. There was no doubt that there was a deity who volunteered to be the witness of the oath. If he really did something wrong to the halfling thief, then this deity would be responsible for fulfilling the oath without the slightest bit of compromise. Orire was a world filled with supernatural powers. Anyone who swore an oath would have to be careful. Otherwise, the chances of receiving retribution would definitely exceed 50%. Perhaps it was because the oath had come into effect. Portia's face quickly regained her playful smile. She placed the 3 potion bottles filled with invisibility potions into her waist pouch and walked towards the door without looking back. As she walked, she waved her hand and said, "Then it's settled. I'll sneak into Valen City tomorrow and collect the easier materials on this list within 3 days. The rest will depend on luck." "Thanks. When the time comes, I will instruct Mabel to cooperate with you. If you really can't do it, then forget it. Don't force yourself. After all, the invisibility potion isn't omnipotent. At the very least, it won't be able to hide from a canine's sensitive sense of smell." Andre shouted at the woman's graceful back. Understood. It's not like I'm a thief who's stolen for the first time. I know how to deal with those hunting dogs guarding the house. After saying this, Borsha directly pushed open the door and walked towards the wooden house not far away. She was in a hurry to finish the scabbard and hilt before setting off, so she didn't want to waste any time. After watching the huge-breasted lowly leave, Andre was the only one left in the crude blacksmith shop. However, he didn't forge weapons like he had done a few days ago. Instead, he took out a piece of parchment and a quill and started to write and draw on it, designing armor and weapons. After a short while, two weapons that didn't look like blades and a sword didn't look like swords appeared on the paper. As for the armor, he had fully considered the comprehensive factors of strength, weight, agility, and so on. He had chosen the relatively light chainmail. The specific plan was to melt down the mithril scimitar and then mix in a certain proportion of steel. Although it would be a bit more troublesome to make, its defensive power was unquestionable. The only downside was that it had a weak defense against blunt weapons. In addition, there were also some small things like knee pads, elbow pads, and so on. Not only would it ensure that the defensive power was sufficient, but it would also not cause inconvenience due to its heavy weight. Time passed by, and it didn't take long for the sky to turn completely dark. Just when the few drawings were about to be completed, Andre suddenly heard his stomach growling. He raised his head and glanced at the beautiful sunset outside the window. He was surprised to find that it was already dusk. He hurriedly put out the fire in the furnace and cleaned up the mess. He closed the door and walked towards the wooden house, ready to have a sumptuous dinner to reward himself. One had to know that drawing a design was a very mentally taxing thing. In addition, he had not eaten lunch, so he felt particularly hungry. He could almost eat a cow. When he thought of the delicious seafood chowder and fragrant grilled fish stewed by Fiona, Andre began to salivate. He quickly quickened his pace and soon disappeared at the end of the country road. Early the next morning, when the east was just starting to turn a little white, two pairs of young men and women appeared on the beach of Sea Turtle Island. It was Andre and his group. They loaded 60 forged steel longswords, scimitars, leather gloves inlaid with steel plates, as well as helmets, shin guards, daggers, and other items that Mabel had made during her free time when she was practicing her blacksmithing. Then, they pushed the boats into the sea when the tide was high. The pig iron ingots purchased in Valen City last time had been mostly used up. Most of them had been smelted into steel. Those swords and armor were the result. Even though there weren't many of them, the price was definitely more than 3 times that of ordinary iron products. According to the normal market price, an iron combat dagger that weighed less than half a kilogram would cost around 2 gold coins. However, if it was made of steel, the price would immediately exceed 5 gold coins. Long swords and scimitars were made of similar materials. If they were brand new, they would cost around 10 to 15 gold coins. However, if they were made of steel, they would cost more than 30 gold coins. Moreover, most of them were forged in one go. At most, some layering techniques would be used. For example, if Andre used the steel clamping method to forge them, it wouldn't be a problem to sell them for 50 gold coins. 60 of them would be 3,000 gold coins. Chapter 456. It had to be known that he'd only spent a total of 160 Alliance gold coins, including the tools and iron ingots. After a series of processing and forging, the cost had increased by nearly 200 times. It was even faster than robbing. In terms of profit, it was probably second only to making magic items and selling salt. It was no wonder that in Oraire, the people or organizations that could engage in mining, smelting, and forging were either nobles with a long history or large merchant groups with strong financial resources. On one hand, they monopolized high-level smelting technology, especially steelmaking. Many blacksmiths in small places didn't know how to use simple methods to remove the impurities in pig iron. They could only use the most primitive methods of hammering, quenching, and tempering to achieve their goals. It was both time-consuming and laborious. Otherwise, the price of steel products wouldn't be so high. On the other hand, they often directly or indirectly controlled most of the minerals and could provide a steady stream of cheap raw materials for their blacksmiths. As for others who wanted to buy, they could, but the price, all right, 5 times the price was already giving you face. Unless you were going for the premium route, you could be crushed by the price at any time. Fortunately, there were no iron mines in the Sardinia Islands, so all steel products relied on smugglers. At the same time, the blacksmiths in Valence City were only half-baked and couldn't satisfy the huge market. Andre had taken advantage of this point and decided to show himself as a blacksmith. He didn't forge many things anyway, so he was going for the high-end route. If he sold them to the pirate leaders and gang leaders, he wouldn't have too much conflict with the weapons merchants and could even work together. Looking at the swords and knives piled up on the ship, an excited smile appeared on Mabel's face. She said to her beloved sister, "Fiona, I'm leaving. I'll likely be staying in Valence City for a few days this time. Take care of yourself at home. If you run into any trouble, ask Gon for advice. With his wisdom, he'll be able to resolve it easily." The young girl nodded meekly. "I understand. You be careful too. Valence City isn't a peaceful place. I've heard that terrifying murders happen every night. You can always see a dozen or so corpses floating on the surface of the sea when the sun rises. Hee, don't worry, I'm still here. Things in the underground world aren't that big of a deal. As long as you pay enough protection fees according to the rules, no one will come looking for trouble. At least a few dozen steel weapons won't attract any attention." At some point in time, Bosha had appeared from the side and hugged Fiona's slender waist. She said very playfully, after spending nearly 3 weeks together, the two women had become good friends. Occasionally, they would hide at the side and whisper to each other. To use a fashionable word to describe them, they were best friends. "Then I'll leave everything to you. Don't let anything happen to my brother." As she spoke, Fiona bent down, intimately hugged the big-breasted lowly, and kissed her on the cheek. "No problem. Leave it to me." Borsha waved her small fist, turned around, and leaped up. She landed firmly on the small boat, fully displaying her perfect body coordination. Mabel nodded at the other two and immediately jumped onto the boat as well. They soon left the shore and sailed towards Valence City. Under Andre's tutelage, he was no longer the pedantic and simple fisherman from half a month ago. Instead, he was an ambitious youth who desired to achieve great things and gain wealth, status, and fame. In addition, he was slowly beginning to grasp the berserk ability hidden in his bloodline. It wasn't a problem for him to deal with 3 to 5 adults who didn't have a professional rank. With the first ray of light from the rising sun, the small boat finally disappeared completely from sight. Andre lightly patted the girl who was standing there in a daze and reminded her softly, "Let us go back. They won't be able to return until at least the day after tomorrow." Fiona smoothed her hair that had been messed up by the sea breeze and followed Andre back to the wooden house. In fact, she didn't feel any reluctance towards her brother's departure. Instead, she was secretly delighted. After all, for a girl who had just experienced the first awakening of love, family ties, and the like could only be ranked behind love. Being alone with the person she admired was the most important thing. However, Andre's mind was filled with the problem of his part-time job, as well as the design of weapons and armor. He didn't notice Fiona's tender gaze, nor did he notice a pair of eyes filled with hatred peeping from the forest. "Damn bastard. I'll definitely make you pay for what you've done. And you and your brother. Stupid bitch. I'll never forget what you've done. Blood for blood." An ugly man with only one hand left gritted his teeth and cursed. It was Edmund, who had been drowned in the sea half a month ago. Obviously, he didn't die. He was trying to break free from the rope and was waiting for an opportunity to take revenge. However, after experiencing the battle that night, Edmund deeply realized that with his own strength, it was difficult to even protect himself, let alone take revenge. Therefore, he didn't even dare to return home these days. He had been wandering in the wilderness, silently waiting for an opportunity. This was because he had calculated that in a few days, Captain Kent of the Seawolf would come to pick him up. As long as he continued to endure for a while, he would be able to pay back all the suffering he had suffered these days and taste the sweetness of revenge. After watching Andre and Fiona disappear into the bushes, the young man who had been twisted by hatred took a deep breath. He suppressed the burning anger and the festering wound on his wrist and resolutely walked towards the cave, not far away. In order to be able to break free from the tough rope, he smashed his injured hand as bait to attract a saw shark. He then used the saw-like front part of the shark to break free from the rope and finally escaped before the oxygen ran out. Of course, the price was that one of his hands was completely crippled and his body was riddled with scars. Under the influence of the hot temperature, some parts of his body had already started to rot and pus. He looked like a zombie that had walked out from a horror movie. The reason why he was still persevering and living was for one goal, and that was revenge. Every day, he ate raw fish, shells, crabs, and even the corpses of his companions from the sea, drank the dew that dripped from the cave, endured the torture of illness and injuries, slept on damp rocks full of sea cockroaches, avoided the fishermen that came and went. Everything was for the pleasure of revenge, even if it meant falling into the bottomless abyss with the enemy. Chapter 457. To a certain extent, Edmund could be considered as a man with a strong mind. If he had a better chance, it wouldn't be difficult for him to stand out. But it was a pity that Andre's arrival had destroyed all his hopes and even snatched away his lover. Every time he saw Fiona's graceful figure and the gentleness in her eyes, he could feel a fire burning in his heart, as if it was going to devour him completely. After forcing himself through the coconut forest, Edmund finally arrived at a cave on the west side of the sea. This was his temporary residence for more than half a month. He carefully looked around and made sure that no one was following him before he quickly went in and sat on a relatively dry rock. With a crazed look, he said to the few rotten corpses beside him, "Hey, guys, I'm back. I just saw that little bitch Fiona and that bastard who threw you guys into the sea to feed the fishes. I almost couldn't help but rush out and strangle them all to death. But fortunately, I restrained myself at the last moment because I can't take revenge alone, and I can't let that bitch Fiona taste the bitter fruit of her own actions. Wait for another day or two. Wait for another day or two, my friends. When the time comes, I'll bring the pirates and kill them, and rape Fiona in front of that gigolo until she dies. Then I'll chop off all the limbs of my enemies, tie them up with rocks, and throw them into the sea." After roaring out the last few words, Edmund suddenly laughed like a madman. He bent down and opened his yellowed teeth and began to gnaw on the rotten corpses. As he chewed and swallowed, he muttered neurotically, "Power. I need power. Great power. Give me all your power. Then I can take revenge." With a creepy whisper echoing in the cave, coupled with a horrifying scene, anyone with a normal mind would vomit uncontrollably. It must be known that cannibalism was something that was unacceptable in any world. Even in the barbaric and backward Oleo continent, once it was discovered in many places, it would immediately be burned at the stake. Even the most vicious of bandits would not dare to offend it lightly, or else they would be greeted by the knights of the various major churches. There were no good or neutral gods who could tolerate this. Even most of the evil gods openly expressed their opposition to cannibalism. Only crazy demon worshippers would do such a thing. There was no doubt that Edmund had stepped onto a path of no return. Even his mental state seemed a little abnormal. After a few hours of sailing, the shabby fishing boat finally crossed the dangerous waters once again and arrived at the only city in the Sardinia Islands, Whalen. Mabel couldn't remember how many times she had come to the City of Sin, but she had never been as excited as she was today. This was because he was no longer selling cheap fish, but expensive, high-quality weapons and armor. More than half a month ago, she was still a small person who worked hard to survive. Every month, she would wake up early and work late to buy necessities. Even so, she could barely survive. Now that she had thousands of gold coins worth of goods, she would naturally feel excited. After all, 3,000 gold coins was not a small amount, especially for a commoner who lived at the bottom of society. In many places where trade was not developed, this amount of money was enough to buy a small manor and live a peaceful and prosperous life for the rest of her life. I'm really blessed by the goddess of luck. I actually unintentionally saved someone who could change her fate. Staring at the harbor that was getting closer and closer, Mabel clenched the sword hanging on her belt and muttered to herself. Ever since she knew that her bloodline had violent power, she had begun to train her combat skills. Even though half a month was not enough for her to become a true warrior, she could already use her footwork and sword properly. She was no longer a fisherman who could be bullied by others. "Hey, what are you muttering about?" Bosha, who had wrapped herself in her cloak, asked with a twitch of her mouth. She didn't know if it was because she had been living too comfortably recently, but the closer she got to Valence City, the worse her mood became. She couldn't help but recall the terrible past, and her entire being became irritable and restless. Mabel didn't mind the lowly's somewhat aggressive tone and shrugged with a smile. "Nothing. I was just lamenting about the fickleness of fate. Maybe you don't know, but I was still a poor descendant of slaves half a month ago. But when that person appeared, my entire life changed completely." "You're talking about Gond?" A trace of curiosity appeared in the lowly's eyes. Even though she didn't even know Andre's real name, it didn't mean that she wasn't interested. She had even tried to ask Fiona about it in private, but she could only get a few stammering answers every time. That's right. He's the most special person I've ever met. Very, very special. There's an indescribable attraction to him. From the first time I saw him, I didn't hesitate to fish him out of the sea without the slightest hesitation. At this point, a trace of pride appeared on Mabel's face. Facts have proven that I did the right thing. Look at everything now. He used less than half a month to let me and my sister live a different kind of life. At least we live with dignity, and it will only get better and better in the future. Bosha keenly captured the information revealed in Mabel's words. She suddenly raised her head and asked quickly, "So you know Gond's true identity?" Mabel nodded lightly. "Of course, but I can't tell you right now unless I get his permission. Also, you'd better hide quickly. We're about to reach the shore. Once someone discovers your tracks, half of Valence City will fall into chaos." "TC, if you can't tell me, then don't. I'll figure it out myself one day." Bosha stomped her foot in irritation. She quickly adjusted her breathing and entered stealth with the help of light and shadows. She was like a gray ball at the moment, unmoving and blending into the small boat. If one didn't observe closely, they wouldn't be able to discover that a halfling was hiding inside. Aurère's thieves were usually very good at using light, the environment, and blind spots to camouflage themselves. In the eyes of an outsider, it was as if they had suddenly disappeared from sight. Thus, this technique was called stealth. Chapter 458. Mabel stared at the place where the halfling thief was hiding a few times, and only when she was certain that nothing was amiss did she move the oars and let the small boat slowly dock at the simple dock. Just like last time, he anchored the small boat in front of the inn and casually grabbed a scimitar, a long sword, and 2 gauntlets. He held them in his arms and walked straight to the inn's entrance, not worried in the slightest that the goods on the boat would be stolen by thieves. He knew that the best thieves in all of Valence City were currently hiding on the boat. If any ignorant brat dared to act rashly, they would be knocked to the ground in an instant. The Thousand Sails Inn was one of the many places in the lower city for sailors to pass the time. Not only did it provide plenty of low-quality alcohol 24/7, but there were also many scantily clad women with decadent auras wandering around the hall, looking for energetic customers. Once they had negotiated a price, they would have sex in the simple and crude room at the back. It could be said that there was no difference between day and night here, nor was there any so-called rest. Every person who walked in would uncontrollably indulge in alcohol, tobacco, and women. There were even a few who would try out more exciting activities, such as fighting beasts or eating powerful hallucinogens refined with magic. After all, pirates were a group of people who didn't know tomorrow after today. Who knew if they would suddenly die? It could be an intense naval battle, a terrifying disease, or a terrifying storm. Anyway, the sea was so dangerous, and there were countless situations that could kill them. How could they not properly relax after every robbery? Driven by such thoughts, almost all pirates would wantonly squander the wealth they had plundered when they reached the shore. Only a few with a clear head knew how to accumulate wealth, and when they had earned enough, they would find an opportunity to leave and enjoy the rest of their lives. Mabel, who had seen this chaotic scene more than once, furrowed her brows and carefully avoided the drunken drunkards. At the same time, she had to politely decline the prostitutes who came up to hit on her. With great difficulty, she squeezed her way to the front of the bar and sat down. She lowered her voice and said to the burly man beside her, "Boss Garrick, I have a batch of weapons and armor that I want to sell. Would you be interested?" Weapons and armor? Iron Fist Garrick, who was a little tipsy, turned his head and looked at the young man from head to toe. Soon, he showed a hint of surprise. "Oh, damn it. Mabel, you've changed a lot. Look at your clothes. If it wasn't for the fact that you came to sell your fish half a month ago, I wouldn't have recognized you. What's the matter? Have you changed your business to weapons?" Hearing these words, Mabel smiled bitterly and shook her head. "No, I just know a very powerful blacksmith and help him sell some weapons and armor made from steel. Please take a look. Here are some samples." As he spoke, he quietly passed the long sword, scimitar, and gauntlet to the bartender. Then, he ordered a large glass of ale from the bartender and sipped it slowly. As someone who had some understanding of the underground powers of Valen City, Mabel was very clear that if something like a weapon was sold without the permission of the head of the Underground Guild, there would only be two outcomes. One was to be mysteriously robbed, and the other was to be murdered. There was no third option. It was very clear that as of now, the only person she knew who had contact with the Underground Guild was this brawny man in front of her. Garrick didn't pay attention to the noise in the hall and directly pulled out half of the longsword. He was instantly attracted by the cold blade and the gleaming blade. He touched it lightly with his finger and tested its sharpness on the edge of the bar counter. Soon, an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. "My God, this is the best, sharpest longsword I've ever seen. Tell me quickly, how many do you have?" 30 longswords, 30 scimitars, 10 pairs of gauntlets, and some helmets, shin plates, and other defensive equipment. Mabel replied quietly. "So many? What's the price?" Even though he looked like a brawny and simple-minded brawny man, Garrick wasn't stupid at all. On the contrary, he had a craftiness that didn't match his appearance. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to climb to the position of head. One had to know that Valen City was filled with all sorts of schemes and plots. If one only had brute strength, then they could only become a hired thug or bodyguard. If one wanted to climb up the ranks, then they needed to have the intelligence to match their strength. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know when they would be stabbed. Without a doubt, Garrick could see the value of these weapons at a glance, so he planned to take them all in one go. The only thing he was worried about now was whether or not he could raise enough money. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of using underhanded means, but considering that a blacksmith who could create such excellent products couldn't be a nobody, he probably knew many powerful professionals. Thus, he had long since given up on this idea. Moreover, compared to a one-time deal, he wanted to make a steady stream of money. If he wanted to make a lot of money in Valen City, then obtaining a stable source of goods was the most basic of basics. The scimitars and longswords are 50 Alliance gold coins each, the gloves are 8 gold coins, the armor and helmet are 10 gold coins, and any form of bargaining is rejected. 50 gold coins? Oh my God, you're robbing me. The finished longsword from other places are only 25 gold coins each, and yours are twice as expensive. Garrick pretended to be angry as he roared in a low voice. In reality, he was very clear that this price wasn't expensive at all, and could even be said to be rather cheap. If he sold it to someone who needed it, then he could immediately make a profit of more than 50%. Steel weapons were rare in Valen City, and many pirate leaders were willing to get their hands on one for self-defense. Thus, the market was always in a state of hunger, and there was no need to worry about sales. However, as the saying goes, all merchants are evil. Suppressing the price was a necessary skill for all buyers, not to mention that Garrick was the leader of a gang. It was already good enough that he didn't threaten them. Unfortunately, Mabel was no longer the timid fisherman she used to be. She retorted fearlessly, "Boss, I believe you understand the difference between steel and iron products, so I won't waste any more words." Seeing that you've helped me before, I only want to ask you one thing. Do you want these goods or not? If you don't want them, then I'll have to contact other buyers." Garrick's expression instantly turned ugly when he heard these words. He hadn't expected that the normally submissive youth would be so calm today, not at all afraid of him, and even dare to speak to him in such a tone. It was simply inconceivable to the extreme. Chapter 459. Valen City was a city jointly controlled by the underground guilds and pirates. No one knew what kind of agreement they had signed in private, but the first pirate king had completely delegated the authority to 10 daring smugglers. He had also promised that as long as they could pay a certain amount of taxes and provide the necessary resources, the entire city would be under their control. After countless years of development, the first 10 smugglers had gradually taken root here and developed into a powerful underground gang. Today, there were only 6 left, each controlling the city's food, weapons, armor, spices, and cloth trade. It could even be said that they had a tight grip on the economic lifeline of the Sardinia Islands. Most of the pirates were like a bunch of idiots, always handing over the things they had stolen to the gangs to deal with while they took the money and enjoyed themselves at the entertainment venues set up by the other party. They would only go out to sea to rob again after spending the last copper on them. It was obvious that their wealth had all flowed into the pockets of the underground guilds. Only a few of the upper echelons of the pirates knew how to accumulate a portion of their wealth for a rainy day. If it weren't for the fact that the successive pirate kings had incredible control over the leaders of the guilds and could mobilize all the resources with a single order, the outside world might have already begun to speculate that the island had silently changed rulers. It was obvious that Garrick was a small leader under the 6 major guilds. He was mainly responsible for protecting the shops around the Thousand Sails Inn from being harassed by drunkards and hoodlums. At the same time, he had to ensure that the taxes were paid on time every month. As for the extra money and protection fees, they belonged to him. From a certain perspective, this could be considered a contracted operation. The upper echelons would set a quota, and the people below would manage it on their own, fully mobilizing everyone's enthusiasm to achieve the goal of maximizing benefits. It was just like the East India Company during the Age of Discovery on Earth. Of course, the underground guilds also had a cruel selection and elimination system to ensure that there wouldn't be idiots who would blackmail or kidnap merchants and kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Once they discovered that a leader's management method wasn't up to standard, 1 or 2 ruthless hoodlums or thugs would quickly get the hint and start to challenge the boss of the area through certain methods. It might be an assassination, a duel, or a kidnapping. In any case, they would use all the methods they thought could kill their target. The successful ones would become the new leaders, while the defeated ones would be thrown into the sea, and even their families would suffer along with them. As a person who had stood out from the bitter competition and had held the position of the leader for 5 years, Garrick knew very well how many pairs of eyes were staring at him, looking for an opportunity to kill him and replace him. Therefore, he had been secretly accumulating strength in an attempt to climb to a higher position. However, in order to achieve this, a large amount of money was necessary. After all, regardless of whether it was bribing the guild leader or training loyal subordinates, just a surplus every month and the filial piety from helping the thieves dispose of their stolen goods was not enough at all. Now that a business that could make a lot of money had suddenly appeared, Garrick couldn't help but frown as he silently sized up the young man sitting beside him who was calmly drinking while thinking of countermeasures. After a long while, he finally asked, "Mabel, if you don't mind, can you tell me who the blacksmith who made these weapons is and where he lives? If it's convenient, it'd be best if you could bring me to meet him. I'm sure you know the value of steel weapons in Valen City. If you don't have a hidden channel, it'd easily cause a lot of trouble once discovered." "I'm sorry, Boss Garrick, I really can't help you with this. This blacksmith isn't an ordinary person. He even has the ability to forge magical weapons and defensive equipment. I'll bring one for you to see the next time I come, but his personality is a bit strange, and he doesn't like to have too much contact with strangers. That's why he's put me in charge of selling these premium weapons and then buying enough iron ingots to bring back." Mabel followed Andre's teachings and spoke without leaving out a single detail. Perhaps he still didn't know that this sinister and cunning gang leader in front of him was thinking of bypassing the middleman and directly reaching an agreement with the blacksmith of the weapons. However, he instinctively felt danger and subconsciously raised his guard. One of his hands silently pressed on the hilt of his sword. As soon as he felt that something was wrong, he would immediately activate his immature berserk ability and chop the opponent into minced meat. Is that so? That's a pity. You should know that it's not easy to meet a blacksmith who can forge magical weapons. You've really hit the jackpot. After saying that, Garrick pretended to spread out his hands helplessly and pretended to have a regretful expression. In fact, with his rich experience in fighting, he could see the young man's action of holding the sword at a glance. He knew that if he continued to probe further, the consequences would likely develop in the worst direction. Therefore, he decisively ended this topic. The underground guild was not like what outsiders imagined, consisting of a group of vicious gangsters who took pleasure in bullying, torturing, and humiliating others all day long. On the contrary, one of their basic purposes was to make profits. To put it bluntly, it was to make money. In essence, they should be regarded as businessmen who engaged in a special industry. Without enough benefits, only fools would think of fighting and killing all day long. It was absolutely impossible for them to fight to the death. First of all, they would not take the initiative to provoke those who were stronger than them or enemies who were on par with them. Otherwise, even if they could achieve victory in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. The gains would not make up for the losses, not to mention the high probability of failure. Secondly, since they were businessmen, they naturally would not casually kill people. As the saying goes, peace breeds wealth. If they made everyone on the streets feel insecure, how could they do business and make money? Lastly, and also the most important, the Underground Guild had announced that anyone who dared to act against special talents would be hunted down by the entire Valen City. The definition of the so-called special talents was very broad, ranging from mages who mastered powerful arcane magic to farmers who were proficient in farming. Basically, anyone who had a skill was included. Blacksmiths who could forge high-quality weapons and armor were naturally one of them, and their status was only below mages, priests, druids, warlocks, and other spellcasters. Without a doubt, the Underground Guild that ruled Valen City was not as stupid as the rumors said, purposely causing the entire city to fall into chaos. They clearly understood the importance of recruiting special talents for their own development. Chapter 460. It was just that the pirates were used to using simple and crude methods to deal with problems. The criminals, smugglers, and prostitutes that escaped from all directions caused the cost of maintaining law and order to be too high. Thus, it was a good thing that he joined in and used violence to manage the situation. This way, the administrative costs would be reduced to the greatest extent, and the taxes collected would be quite high as well. Even though Garrick really wanted to give Mabel a vicious punch, he held himself back in the end. He understood that if he acted rashly before investigating the other party's background, the unlucky one would most likely be himself. Even though he was being called boss and sounded very impressive, he was very clear that he was only a mid-level leader. There were at least 4 levels above him. If he really did make a big mistake, a single word from the higher-ups would be enough to take his life. Seeing that the other party had no intention of making a move, Mabel relaxed a little and shook her head with a wry smile. "Boss Garrick, please don't tease me anymore. Just tell me the truth. Do you want these goods or not? I'm really in need of money. That blacksmith has instructed me to deliver the things he needs within 3 days. Yes, of course I want them, but I'm a little short on funds right now and can't buy so much. Do you think I can?" Garrick rapped his fingers on the bar table and revealed a very awkward expression. "I'm afraid I can't lower the price, but you can use some special items to pay off your debt. I just happen to have a list with the names and prices of a few dozen materials. As long as you can get them, I'll waive the corresponding amount. How about it?" As she spoke, Mabel took out the list she had already prepared and secretly handed it over. He didn't expect Garrick to be able to get his hands on a few items, but wanted to use the other party's information network to find out who in Valen City had these items. When the time came, the halfling thief would have a target to attack. It was obvious that this was Portia's idea. Only she would know so much about the underground gangs. Garrick quickly glanced at the contents of the parchment and discovered that it was all related to magic. He instantly understood that the blacksmith that the youth spoke of might really exist. He immediately agreed without hesitation. No problem. I'll think of a way to get a portion of it to fill the gap in funds as soon as possible, but you have to give me half of the goods first. Of course, I'll pay the corresponding amount of gold coins. Of course, all the goods are on a small boat at the simple dock outside. You can pick them up anytime and anywhere. Bullshit. You actually left such valuable goods outside. Quick, take me there. Hearing that there was a pile of steel weapons thrown out in the open, Garrick could no longer remain calm. He stood up and ran towards the door. He was the clearest about the security situation in Valence City. Thieves were as numerous as the hairs on a cow, especially those half-grown children. In order to have a meal, they would steal almost anything without considering the consequences. Mabel narrowed her eyes and muttered to herself, "Looks like he's not as hard to deal with as I thought. At least I still have 3 trump cards that I haven't used yet. However, it would be great if I could deal with him smoothly." After saying that, he took out a few copper coins and threw them on the table. He quickly got up and followed behind. As the protector of this street, Garrick didn't have to pay whether it was for food, drinks, or women. However, Mabel didn't enjoy similar privileges, so he still had to pay for the ale. Otherwise, the bartender would definitely take out the crossbow hidden under the table. This wasn't the first time he'd seen people who wanted to dine and dash, only to have their thighs pierced by a sharp crossbow. He definitely didn't want that to happen to him. However, just as he was about to reach the door, a woman who looked to be about 20 years old with heavy makeup suddenly raised a fair leg and stopped him. She asked in an extremely seductive voice, "Hey, handsome young man, are you interested in going to the room on the 2nd floor to get intimate with me? Seeing that you're quite handsome, I'll give you half price." Half? Half price? Mabel had obviously never seen such a scene before. She hurriedly took a few steps back, her eyes staring straight at that fair long leg as she subconsciously swallowed her saliva. Although he was already 25 years old this year, he was still a virgin through and through. In the past, he was always dressed in tattered clothes, so no prostitutes would pay attention to such a poor man. However, it was different now. He was wearing brand new tight-fitting clothes with a long sword by his waist. He also had a pair of leather boots inlaid with metal on his feet. Coupled with his heroic square face, he looked 100 times better than those drunken pirates who emitted a strong stench from head to toe. Wow, you're actually so shy that your face is red. I like introverted and conservative men. Come on, you only need to pay 5 silver coins, and you can enjoy the treatment of an emperor. If you have enough stamina, it wouldn't be a problem to play for an entire night. The woman laughed and teased as she used the tip of her foot to tease the important parts of the young man's lower body. She even purposely pulled down her coconut shell cup, revealing a large expanse of snowy white beauty. It had to be said that she was indeed very well endowed. She didn't have the sagging, yellowish skin, black-eye bags, or yellowish teeth like other prostitutes. Her young body was brimming with health and vitality, especially her 2 slender and powerful thighs. Quite a few experienced courtesans on the 1st floor drooled over them, secretly imagining how much fun they could bring to the intense bed activity. Add to that her pretty face, and she could be considered a beauty in the entire Valence City. Mabel only felt her mouth go dry as every cell in her body entered a state of excitement. If it wasn't for the last bit of rationality in her brain reminding her that this was Valence City, and that everyone, from white-haired old men to 7- or 8-year-old children, could be villains who killed without batting an eyelid, she would have already pounced on him. The young prostitute noticed the changes in the young man's body, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She drew circles on her chest with her finger as she lowered her voice and whispered in his ear, "Remember, you absolutely have to find me in the 3rd room from the 2nd floor. I have a plan to share with you, a plan to get rid of Garrick." After she finished speaking, a meaningful light flashed in her eyes. She swayed her plump and round buttocks, giggling as she slapped away the perverted hands that wanted to take advantage of her. She quickly went up the stairs to the second floor. Mabel immediately woke up as the other party completely disappeared from her sight. She couldn't help but shiver as beads of sweat quickly appeared on her forehead. Chapter 461. The woman's last sentence was so explicit that anyone who wasn't an idiot could understand it clearly. Especially the killing intent she displayed in that short moment. It was enough to prove that her hands were stained with the blood of many people. Without a doubt, she wasn't a prostitute, but an ambitious schemer who schemed to replace him. The reason she used such a method to approach him was because she didn't want outsiders to know her true identity and goal. After all, the Thousand Sails was Garrick's territory. If she wasn't careful, it wouldn't take long for her to become a corpse floating on the sea. Conspiracy, trickery, betrayal. This was the unchanging theme of Valen City's chaotic nature. Only now did Mabel realize the true meaning behind Andre's words about adapting to the situation. In reality, he didn't have any good feelings towards Garrick, who used to oppress him, so he didn't have any psychological burden. The only thing he needed to consider was whether the other party had the strength to match it. After standing in place and considering for a few seconds, he decided to sell half of the goods to Garrick first and then discuss with Bosha. He also wanted to find out more about this woman and see if she could become a better partner. Thinking of this, the young man sighed slightly and quickly walked out of the door, arriving at the simple dock only a few steps away from the Thousand Sails Inn. It was obvious that he wasn't used to fighting and scheming. More accurately, he couldn't deal with it. After all, whether it was knowledge, or life experience, he couldn't compare to those old foxes who had been in Valen City for many years. Fortunately, he had a halfling thief who was proficient in the matters of gangs following him. Otherwise, he would have been swallowed whole sooner or later. Ha! Excellent. Truly excellent. All of them are high-quality weapons made of steel, and they were forged using a special method. Hardness, toughness, and the beautiful patterns on the edges. They're like works of art. I'm sure many pirate leaders would be willing to pay a high price to buy them for self-defense. Completely unaware of what had just happened, Garrick was standing in the small boat, inspecting the quality of the swords one by one. His mouth was constantly letting out exclamations of surprise, and the greed in his eyes could be clearly felt even from a distance of more than 10 meters. It's good that you're satisfied. Please pay 1,500 gold coins now, and you can take half of the goods. Mabel stepped on the creaking wooden planks and walked unhurriedly to the side of the small boat. He wasn't worried at all about the muscular man in front of him going back on his word. This was because Bosha, who was in stealth, was already prepared for battle. She could instantly use her special skill, backstab, with her enchanted dagger to pierce the back of the opponent's head. The so-called backstab was actually a technique that was hidden in the dark and suddenly launched a fatal attack. It had to meet two conditions. First of all, the attacker had to ensure that they were not discovered in advance. Secondly, they had to approach the target from behind and not be detected by the enemy before they hit. Lastly, and most importantly, the attacker had to have sufficient understanding of the human body to know which parts were fatal and which parts could cripple the target after being hit. Generally speaking, only thief-related professions had the knowledge and skills to match it. Ordinary people would probably be discovered before they could even get close to it. Portia was clearly an expert in stealth. At this moment, she was hiding behind a wooden barrel that was less than 2 meters away from her target. Be it her breathing, heartbeat, or body temperature, all of them were controlled to perfection. She looked like an unremarkable pile of goods, not moving at all. Even though her main job was to steal expensive gold, silver, and jewelry, she would occasionally kill a few people who had committed heinous crimes. Her assassination skills weren't low at all, at least much better than Mabel's. Garrick didn't know that there was a huge bustling hiding behind him, who could take his life at any time. He nodded with a big smile. No problem. Here, these are 15 gold notes from the Willie Merchant Association. Each one is worth 100 gold coins. Not only can you withdraw them, You can also spend them in any store in the city. Check them. Like most cities in the South, most transactions in Valence City were paid with bills of exchange piled up by reputation. Perhaps it was because there were too many thieves, robbers, and scoundrels, but anyone with money here liked to exchange their money for bills with special markings and code words. On one hand, it was easy to carry around. It could be hidden anywhere on the body, such as the soles of shoes, underwear, or hair. Some people would even cut open their own flesh and stuff the bills of exchange in, then sew them back together with a needle and thread. On the other hand, the bills of exchange in Valence City were different from other places. They provided a special service that only the owner could withdraw. Just this point alone ensured that others wouldn't be able to withdraw cash even if they managed to steal it, greatly guaranteeing the safety of one's assets. However, the bills of exchange Garrick provided didn't fall into this category. Although Mabel had never seen these high-level financial products before, she had at least heard of the rumors. She carefully inspected the giant snake seal at the bottom right corner, which seemed to be slowly crawling, and inwardly let out a sigh of relief. It was a seal stamped with a special ink that would change color according to the angle of the light, creating a strange visual deception. From afar, it looked like a snake had come to life. This was the greatest secret of the Willie Merchant Association. No other organization or individual in Valence City had the ability to replicate it. This also meant that 15 sheets of sweat-smelling parchment paper could really be exchanged for 1,500 Alliance gold coins, or the equivalent currency of other regions. Because there were many countries in the Orire, and because the nobles in some regions also had the right to mint their own coins, the types of currency were rather complicated. Add to that the fact that there were metal smelting techniques and the purity and craftsmanship of the coins were uneven, it was very troublesome to convert them. If one wasn't a professional currency changer, they would probably never be able to figure out the tricks within. Fortunately, every region had one or two economically developed countries. The gold and silver coins they produced would become the reference for the exchange in that region. In the southern seas, the Green Sea Alliance's currency was the only reference, equivalent to the US dollar after World War II on Earth. The payment has been confirmed. 1,500 Alliance gold coins are correct. You can now take away 30 weapons, scimitars, long swords, and so on. Mabel stuffed the bills of exchange into the back of her leather boots and gestured for the passenger to proceed. Since that's the case, I won't be polite. Remember, keep the rest of the goods. I'll be able to gather the rest in 2 or 3 days at most. With that, Garrick didn't waste any more words. He directly took out 15 long swords and 15 scimitars, tied them up with ropes, and carried them on his shoulders as he walked toward a remote path. Chapter 462. The weight of a weapon was usually around 3 to 4 kilograms. 30 of them would only weigh 120 kilograms. It was nothing to a muscular man like Garrick. Mabel could not help but heave a sigh of relief as she watched the other party's back gradually disappear. She lowered her voice and said, "Bosha, I have something to discuss with you. There are too many people here. It's not a good place to talk. Follow me, don't fall behind." As the last word fell, a black shadow dashed out of the ship and entered the 1,000 sails in at an extremely fast speed. Her movements were so agile that the passers-by around did not notice her at all. Mabel did not dare to delay. She immediately covered the goods with a rag and followed him into the noisy hall on the first floor. Soon, she found a petite person wearing a gray cloak in a dark corner. Without asking, she knew that she was definitely the halfling thief who had just entered. Without any hesitation, the young man went straight to the bar counter and ordered 2 cups of ale, a few of his signature dishes, and 2 pieces of bread before personally serving them to Portia. At the same time, he glanced at the drunkards around him from the corner of his eyes. After confirming that there was no danger, he softly recounted everything that happened just now, leaving out every single detail. As for Bosha, she was silently listening while taking small bites of her food. She did not interrupt the entire process. She focused on analyzing the situation and thinking of countermeasures to take next. A few minutes later, the food on the table was cleaned up, leaving only the leftover soup on the plate and 2 large cups of fragrant ale. Perhaps it was because of the remote location, but the waitress shuttling through the crowd did not notice that there were several empty plates that needed to be cleaned up. She also did not notice the strange atmosphere between the two. There was no helping it. There were just too many people in the hall on the first floor of the Thousand Sails Inn, especially those pirates who were already very hot-tempered. Once they were drunk, it was simply a big problem. Not only would they have conflicts with the ordinary customers around them, but they also often harassed the waitresses. It was fine if they took advantage of them verbally, but some of them even unscrupulously put their hands under the waitresses' skirts and groped them, or openly attacked their breasts. As a result, the waitresses had developed agile skills, and they would never stop when passing through the crowd. Seeing a girl with a face full of freckles and wearing a white apron flash past her, a smile appeared on Mabel's face. She then took a sip of ale and asked in a low voice, "What do you think? Do you think I should go to the guest room on the second floor and meet that woman?" "Of course you have to meet her. If I'm not wrong, the woman who deliberately seduced you is the famous charm witch of the lower city district, Maris. She's very good at using men to achieve her goals. Some time ago, there were rumors that she was actively planning to take over a piece of territory. Judging from her performance today, it seemed like she had set her sights on Garrick. Be careful, this woman is not simple. Even though the charm, which is just a nickname, and she is not a real mage or warlock, it is a fact that she can make men dizzy. As far as I know, there are at least 7 or 8 unlucky men who have been bewitched by her to do stupid things like murder, robbery, and kidnapping. In the end, without exception, they all died from her crazy revenge, and all the benefits were taken away by this woman. It's as if she can control people's hearts. Of course, if she really has the ability to take over all the territories after Garrick's death, it's not bad for us to help her. After all, if we want to survive, develop, and get what we want in this city, we can't avoid dealing with the underground guilds. Instead of finding someone we're not familiar with to work with, it's better to personally nurture one. At least we don't have to worry about betrayal in the short term. Portia sipped the ale in her cup as she explained the intricate relationships in the lower city district. She was like a completely different person. That naive and cute expression of the past was all gone. Instead, it was replaced by a gaze as sharp as a knife. Even though she was petite, her aggressiveness was not bad at all. In particular, she repeatedly emphasized how dangerous the charm witch, Maris, was. She realized that whenever she mentioned this woman, the young man sitting opposite her would become a little absent-minded, just like a young man who had just fallen in love. As a thief with sharp senses, Portia could easily tell that Mabel had started to have hazy feelings for Maris. She was afraid that he would do something stupid. Love was a deadly poison in Chaos City. Many promising young men fell in love with someone they shouldn't have, and ended up being betrayed or attacked. They degenerated into walking corpses, or even lost their lives. Don't worry. I can control my emotions. I won't be bewitched by anyone. Perhaps Mabel realized that the big-breasted Loli's gaze was a little strange, so he hurriedly explained in a panic. However, it was a pity that there was no trace of fear in his tone. Anyone who wasn't an idiot could tell that he had fallen in love with her. If not for the fact that he knew he had a mission, he would have already taken the initiative to pursue her. Damn it, I knew this trip wouldn't be so smooth. Portia gritted her teeth and cursed softly. Then, she quickly took out a steel needle from her waist pouch and stabbed it into Mabel's thigh. At the same time, she covered his mouth with her other hand and warned him in a very stern tone. "Idiot, wake up. You're on a life and death mission now. If something unexpected happens, you and I might die here. Think about your sister, Fiona, who you depend on for survival. She's still waiting for you to return safely and live a happy life together. Don't ruin all of this because of a sinister woman." The moment the steel needle pierced his thigh, Mabel was in so much pain that he almost jumped up from the chair. He glared at the halfling thief, but when he thought about his sister, he quickly calmed down and his eyes regained their clarity. He took a deep breath, removed the small hand covering his mouth, and nodded lightly. "Thank you for your advice. I think my mind is clear now. At least I won't be led by the nose by the other party." Very good. Looks like you're not so stupid that you can't be saved. Now go to the second floor and meet with that woman. I'll cover you from the outside. If you need help, try to make as much noise as possible. I can rush in from the window at any time." After saying this, Portia took out a piece of leather and gently wiped the bloodstains on the steel needle. Then, she used the dim light in the hall to enter stealth mode and quietly left the inn. Just like when she entered, she didn't attract anyone's attention. Chapter 463. Sigh. I'm really starting to hate Valence City more and more. Alcohol, women, and the twisted and chaotic atmosphere of pleasure. If I continue to stay here, I'm afraid I'll unknowingly lose myself. It's better to settle everything as soon as possible and return to Sea Turtle Island. Mabel rubbed her thigh where she had been stabbed as she smiled wryly to herself. She stood up after a short while and walked straight to the stairs. Actually, the faint feelings he had for Maris were only a normal male's impulsiveness after encountering a beautiful female. It was far from love, and he had immediately tossed it to the back of his mind after being taught a lesson by Boscia. After all, compared to a strange woman he had only known for less than an hour, there was no way he could compare her to his little sister whom he depended on for survival. Carefully avoiding a few drunken pirates who were wrestling with each other, Mabel quickly arrived at the third guest room on the second floor. Just as she was about to knock on the door suddenly opened a crack and a slender arm stretched out from within, accompanied by a burst of playful laughter. "Hee, I can't stand you any longer. You finally appeared before my patience ran out. But before you enter, you have to pay 5 silver coins first. We've already agreed on the price. Please put away these tricks, charming witch. Maris, I've already inquired about your identity, so please don't test me again and again. Otherwise, I don't mind telling Garrick your thoughts." Mabel didn't pay any attention to the other party's provocation and used a tone that kept people at arm's length to issue a threat. Wow, what a heartless man to actually say such hurtful words to a beautiful lady. You have to know that the nickname Charming Witch is a malicious slander against me. Those who died were all of their own free will and weren't under the control of some kind of magic or supernatural force like the rumors say. Forget it. You won't believe me even if I explain now. Let's talk about how to make Iron Fist Garrick disappear completely. Finishing her words, the woman known as the Charming, which by the residents of the lower city, Maris, grabbed the young man's arm and pulled him into the room, quickly closing the door behind her. After entering the room, Mabel's eyes widened as she vigilantly sized up the other party. She inwardly reminded herself not to repeat the same mistake. Less than an hour ago, he had almost been played by this woman. If it wasn't for Boscia's reminder at the crucial moment, he might have become her subordinate or even a mindless slave. Maris didn't care about the young man's actions. After locking the door, she laid down on the bed in a very seductive posture, a playful smile on her beautiful face. "You're welcome. Please sit wherever you want. It's okay, even if you lie on the bed. Who asked me to have a special feeling for you?" Mabel took a deep breath and calmed her wildly beating heart. She sat down on the chair closest to the window and asked, "Tell me, how do you plan to deal with Garrick? And how do you guarantee that you can take over his territory after you kill him? What role do I need to play, and what benefits will I get afterwards?" According to the pre-planned dialogue, he asked the most critical questions in one breath. "Back. Not bad. I really couldn't tell that you could think of so much when you look so dumb. All right, since you've asked, I'll answer you one by one to show my sincerity." Saying this, Maris crossed one leg over the other and used one hand to support her chin. She pointed at the bustling street outside the window. Maybe you don't know, but even though Garrick appears to be loyal to the guild he belongs to on the surface, he's already started running his own business in private, especially through the simple dock in front of the Thousand Sails Inn. Every month, at least 1,000 gold coins worth of goods enter the city, but he hasn't paid a single copper coin in taxes. Do you know what this means? This means betrayal, a naked betrayal to the guild he belongs to. None of the guilds would tolerate their leader keeping such a large sum of money. The higher-ups have already investigated everything, so I've replaced him and become the new ruler of these streets. Of course, a part of this is due to my own ambition. After all, who wouldn't want to climb to a higher position in the chaotic Valence City and enjoy the wonderful taste of power? Since this is the will of the higher-ups of the guild, it means that once Garrick dies in my hands, I'll automatically take over everything he left behind, including territory, wealth, and even women. As for the specifics, we'll talk about it later. You just need to know that I have a way to make that idiot walk right into your trap. After this is done, you can open a shop on my territory and sell these steel weapons. I only want 30% of the profits, including taxes. However, there's a precondition, and that's that I have the right to purchase them first. How about it? Not bad, right? It had to be said that just from the perspective of opening a shop and taxes, the charming witch's offer was indeed generous. It was even much better than the tax system of many other cities. After all, blacksmithing was one of the most profitable industries in Orire. Most countries would levy a tax of more than 50%. So those who could control this industry were either nobles who were exempt from taxes or merchants who were protected by nobles. Ordinary blacksmiths had no way of competing with them in terms of price. At most, they could only open a shop in a small town or village in the countryside to forge farm tools. However, Valence City had always been targeted by the powerful Lincoln City and was sealed off from all aspects, resulting in an extreme shortage of professionals. Add to that the fact that there were no iron mines, so there was no such problem. The reason why Maurice offered such generous conditions was that she wanted to use the youth to ensure that her plan could be carried out smoothly. In particular, the remaining 30 steel weapons could greatly increase the combat strength of her subordinates. On the other hand, she wanted to meet with the blacksmith who had forged these high-quality weapons. If possible, it would be best if she could win him over and make him a good helper for her to realize her ambitions. Mabel didn't know about this woman's wishful thinking. With his intelligence and life experience, he wasn't able to understand too complicated a conflict of interests. Thus, after some consideration, he quickly said, "I think I more or less understand your plan and conditions. Let's end it here for today. Please give me a few hours to consider. Whether you agree or not, I'll give you an answer before nightfall." Chapter 464. Consider? Could it be that the conditions I offered were not good enough? Or do you have other plans, such as betraying me to gain more benefits? Maurice sat up from the bed as she spoke. She narrowed her eyes and stared at the young man, gently stroking the gemstone ring on her finger. Although her tone was still as seductive as ever, it gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. It was as if a female spider that had spread her web and was about to hunt had finally revealed her ferocious side. Murderous intent. Although Mabel was only a sturdy fisherman in the past, the sixth sense she had honed in the sea to avoid danger instantly came into play. She immediately drew the long sword at her waist and asked in a low voice, "What are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do? Of course, I'm trying to eliminate hidden dangers. I hate betrayal, and I hate it even more when people treat me like I'm an idiot. You either give me a definite answer now, or it will be the same as announcing the start of the battle. I'll give you one last hint. Don't underestimate a woman's combat skills." Maurice disappeared from her spot as soon as she finished speaking. The next second, she appeared behind the young man. A pair of metal claws had appeared on her right hand at some point in time. She gently pressed the claws against the skin on the young man's neck. Drops of blood slowly dripped down along the cold, sharp blade. The entire process was clean and efficient, leaving no room for evasion. However, Mabel wasn't alone. Portia, who had been waiting outside the window for a long time, saw that the situation was critical. She immediately used her cloak as a shield and broke through the window, arriving in front of the young man in the blink of an eye. She held a sharp magical dagger in her hand, the thief's friend. She immediately cut off the other party's metal claws. Then, with the advantage of her petite body, she kicked the young man behind the knee and knocked him to the ground. She fiercely warned, "Don't move if you're smart. Otherwise, I don't mind cutting a hole in your neck." "Ha ha, I knew it. I knew you would show up. The king of thieves, Portia." Maurice, who was pressed to the ground, didn't show any fear. Instead, She laughed wildly, as if the dagger on her neck didn't exist. "Shut up, you damn charm witch." I knew this conversation wouldn't be anything good. Portia slapped Maurice's face and cursed with gritted teeth. Obviously, she'd already realized that everything from before was just bait, and her goal was to force him to show himself so that she could figure out his strength. The halfling bandit felt an uncontrollable rage in his heart at the thought of this vixen plotting against him. He wished he could just tear apart that smug face of hers and see if she could still smile again. However, her rationality told her that if she really did that, the consequences would be very serious. In Valen City, almost everyone knew that if a crafty fellow suddenly revealed an obvious flaw in a negotiation, then he would definitely be prepared to deal with it. Acting rashly would only bring about disaster, and there was basically no hope of gaining any advantages. Bah! Maris opened her mouth and spat out a bloody tooth. She said proudly, "Hee, your appearance is really a big surprise. Probably no one would have thought that the king of thieves that the entire underground guild was desperately looking for was actually right in front of me. Tell me, how much can I sell this information for? You still want to sell out my whereabouts at this point?" Portia asked with a cold smile as she used her dagger to cut open the other party's delicate skin. If the following answer didn't satisfy her, then blood would splatter 3 feet in a second. Very simple. I want you to help me kill someone. Perhaps there are people in this city who are more skilled than you in battle, but you definitely won't be able to find a second person who can stand shoulder to shoulder with you in terms of stealth and assassination. Of course, the conditions just now won't change, but I'll add one more condition. You can obtain half of Garrick's personal wealth. As a woman who had wandered the underworld for many years, Maris' mind had long been trained to the point where she was fearless even in the face of death. She calmly stated her conditions. She understood that if the other party wanted to kill you, then it would be useless no matter what you did. If the other party didn't want to kill you, then it wouldn't matter even if you were a little arrogant. Kill who? I'll say this first. If it involves the internal power struggle of the underground guilds, then I'll immediately tear your throat out and leave Valen City as quickly as possible. It won't matter what tricks you have up your sleeves. Portia threatened with a half-truth. From the moment she charged into the room, she knew that she only had 2 choices. One was to cooperate with this cunning woman in front of her, and the other was to kill her and quickly escape on a boat. Otherwise, she would have to face a city-wide manhunt. It was obvious that although the latter would be satisfying, it wouldn't be able to complete the most important mission of this trip. Thus, the former was a smart choice. Ha 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 ha! Maris, whose life was in danger, suddenly laughed out loud for some reason. She quickly fished out a piece of parchment that reeked of a strange smell from the inside of her skirt. Here, this is the name list. There are 6 people in total. None of them are in the upper echelons of the guild, nor are they important figures. They're only trusted aides that Garrick has secretly nurtured. What you need to do is to kill all of them before they realize that danger is approaching. As for Garrick himself, I'll use my own method to get rid of him, just like how he publicly executed Throat Cutter Carl in the downtown area when he was in power. Every new manager must use the blood of the defeated to dye their throne red. This is an eternal tradition of Valen City, and also a deterrent to the ambitious schemers behind them. I already have a perfect plan that will be enough to scare off all the competitors. Hearing this, Portia thought for a few minutes with a gloomy face and quickly nodded. All right, but I want priority in choosing the spoils of war. If you agree, then the people on the name list will become corpses before daybreak tomorrow. No problem. I can give you this promise right now. Maris agreed without even thinking. To her, the most important thing was to get rid of Garrick as soon as possible and take over the territory. As long as it didn't involve the distribution of power, other things like money and benefits could be discussed. After all, if she challenged the leader of a certain area, she would naturally receive countless benefits if she won. But if she lost, the consequences would be even more terrifying than death, especially since she was a rather beautiful woman. Then I look forward to working with you. Portia quickly put away her dagger and extended her right hand. The speed of her change in attitude was unbelievable. Chapter 465. Happy working with you. Maurice wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and similarly extended her right hand to shake hands with the big-breasted lowly. Not a single trace of resentment could be seen on her smiling face, as though she did not mind that the other party had ruthlessly slapped her. In fact, in the underground world, almost every person who could climb to a high position did not care if they were beaten or not, nor did they care about their so-called reputation. Generally speaking, they only cared about two things. One was money and power, and the other was their life. The more money they had, the more loyal and devoted subordinates they could nurture and make them work for them. Moreover, they could also obtain unimaginable power at the same time. Life was the most basic of the basics. Without life, how could one savor an exciting life, enjoy the pleasure of controlling the fate of others, taste delicious food, fine wine, and play with beautiful members of the opposite sex? In short, as long as these two bottom lines were not violated, it was possible to make peace even with enemies who had killed one's father. The two women in the underground world reached an agreement at lightning speed and formed a close alliance. The entire process only took 2 minutes from the beginning to the end. It was completely impossible to tell that they had wanted to get rid of each other before this. As for the rookie Mabel, she did not understand what had happened at all. She stood foolishly on the spot, staring at everything with her eyes wide open. Her face was filled with doubt and incomprehension. With her level of intelligence and knowledge, she was far from being able to understand the stakes involved. She was still puzzled as to why the two people who had been fighting to the death a moment ago could smile and hug each other after 1 or 2 minutes. However, Boscia was too lazy to explain further. She did not even say a word and directly left the youth in the room. She jumped out of the window and jogged along the roof, quickly disappearing without a trace. Hee. See you later, silly little brother. I hope we can continue this business of 5 silver coins in the future. Maris smiled as she teased Mabel. She then turned around and left the room, leaving Mabel alone in the messy room. Now that the sky outside was gradually darkening, the noisy night was about to descend. She had to set everything up as soon as possible, and it had to be done before the other party noticed anything. When the sun rose tomorrow, Iron Fist Garrick would completely become history, and these streets would welcome a new ruler. Just as the two men from Valen City were embroiled in the struggle for power in the underground world, a pirate ship flying a black skull flag slowly sailed into the peaceful bay of Sea Turtle Island. After anchored in the deep waters, it quickly lowered a few small boats and set off for the shore with ferocious pirates on board. The man at the head of the group was an expressionless man wearing exquisite magic leather armor. His hands were crossed in front of his chest, and his chin was full of whiskers. He stood out from the crowd, both in his attire and temperament. He was none other than the famous sea wolf of the Sardinia Islands, Captain Kent. There was no mistaking the terrifying scar from his eyes to the corner of his mouth. It was said that 7 or 8 years ago, he had led a 2-masted sailboat to set up a trap in the Prior Strait and successfully ambushed a Linton merchant convoy escorted by a large warship. Not only had he intercepted a large amount of valuable goods, he had also personally killed 3 feudal knights. That terrifying scar was the medal he had left behind at that time. One had to know that the level of an Aurer's profession wasn't based on a single profession, but the total level of all the professions, including the various professions, advanced professions, and so on. For example, a feudal knight had to start as a rank 5 warrior, and the lowest rank of knight was at least a rank 6 close combat professional. Furthermore, they belonged to the top echelon of close combat fighters. Obviously, to be able to deal with 3 feudal knights at the same time and achieve victory, even with the help of his subordinates, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Someone had seen Captain Kent's massacre. It was said that among all the pirate captains, if one only counted his personal strength, he could at least be ranked in the top 5. His use of the scimitar was superb, and warriors below rank 5 couldn't even last a few minutes before their heads were chopped off. This was because this captain had a combat specialty called combined defense with offense. He could calmly resolve the enemy's siege and then patiently wait for the opponent's physical strength to be exhausted before looking for an opportunity to launch a fatal blow. In fact, he wasn't a captain born from the pirate system. Instead, he suddenly piloted the Sea Wolf to seek refuge with the pirate king, Francis. No one knew where this man came from, and no one knew his previous identity. It wasn't even clear whether his name was real or fake. In just 1 or 2 years, he rose rapidly like a comet, leaving many experienced pirate captains far behind. If it weren't for the poor quality of the crew under him, he would have long become one of the top 10 golden pirates. Many people wanted to know why such a powerful warrior with rich commanding experience suddenly chose to become a pirate. After all, with his skills, as long as he casually sought refuge with a king or a great noble, he would immediately be able to obtain a rich manor and become a privileged class revered by the commoners. Although the income of being a pirate was considerable, once they left the protection of the Sardinia Islands, they would be hated by everyone. All the cities in the Green Sea Alliance that caught pirates usually only had one outcome, and that was to be hanged. Their corpses were hung near the docks and exposed to the sun until they became skeletons. However, Sea Wolf Kent didn't seem to care about this. He still plundered merchant ships day after day without any capital. Today, he suddenly appeared on Turtle Island mainly because he had just plundered a merchant ship and happened to pass by, so he took in a new crew member. Although the Sardinia Islands were known as the evil pirate's nest, there weren't many who were truly suitable for piracy. Excluding those with severe disabilities, the remaining pirates didn't exceed 8,000 people. Many captains would even fight over outstanding crew members, which showed how difficult it was to replenish the crew. Before Andre's Arcane, eye, and bronze cannons appeared, the battles in the southern seas were completely primitive boarding battles. Thus, the number of sailors, fighting skills, and morale determined the strength of a ship. At the same time, the battles were also very tragic. Often, dozens of people would be injured or killed at the end of a battle. If both sides were equal in strength, it wasn't rare for more than half of the sailors to die in one battle. After all, they were only cannon fodder. The true elites with professions were the true backbone of every pirate ship. As long as these guys were still alive, they could quickly recover no matter how big the blow was. Chapter 466. Seeing that the small boat was getting closer and closer to the beach, Kent suddenly asked the first mate behind him, "Neil, are you sure there are a few brats on this island who want to join us?" "Of course. Captain, when I passed by not long ago, I happened to see a few bad boys fishing at sea. One of them called himself Edmund and said that he really wanted to become a strong pirate. I felt that the ship was understaffed recently, so I agreed to his request. Perhaps he's a bit lacking in battle, but at least he knows how to swim and has a decent physique. He should be much better after a few battles." The first mate, who looked to be in his 50s with thinning hair, bowed slightly and replied courteously with one hand on his chest. Perhaps he was putting on airs on purpose, or perhaps he had received a good education in etiquette, but whether it was his attire, speech, or actions, he didn't seem like a boorish person at all. Kent nodded lightly. "Since that's the case, let's go ashore first and recruit the people. We'll rest on this small island for the night and return to Valence City tomorrow morning. I don't want to take the risk of entering the reef-filled waters after dark." "As you wish." Neil bowed again and immediately yelled at the sailors rowing, telling them to work harder. It didn't take long for them to set foot on the white and soft beach. Just as the pirates were about to find a fisherman to ask about the situation on the island, a rotting smell suddenly wafted out from the coconut trees. A few seconds later, a human figure charged out. There weren't many intact patches of skin on his body, and the surface of his body was covered in dark red blood blisters. One of his hands was covered in wounds that were oozing pus. Who knew how many eggs had been laid by the terrifying skin flies? At a glance, the flesh was filled with dense white maggots wriggling around the wounds. Even the bravest pirate couldn't help but feel their scalp go numb. Monster! What a disgusting monster! Every pirate screamed in their hearts at the same time. Even though they were a group of desperados, and some of them even treated their lives as child's play, when faced with something they couldn't understand, their reactions were even worse than ordinary people's. Even the hands holding their weapons were trembling slightly. "Bastard! Stop right there. If you come any closer, don't blame me for being rude." The tall and burly bosun finally couldn't bear it any longer. He raised his heavy scimitar and roared loudly. As a person who had experienced the plague at sea, he knew better than anyone else how many terrifying viruses this person in front of him carried in his body. Perhaps as long as he got a little closer, he would be able to infect a second person, then a third, a fourth, and so on. After that, the entire ship would die of the same symptoms. Due to the extremely backward medical system, Aurere's prevention of infectious diseases was basically nil except for divine spells. If an infected person entered a densely populated city, it was likely that more than half of the city's residents would die. In the worst-case scenario, they would even turn into ghosts. This also meant that once infected, the mortality rate would definitely exceed 99%. The remaining 1% would depend on one's physique and the blessing of the goddess of luck, which was why the pirates were so afraid. The cold gleam of the blade made the strange figure stop in his tracks. His entire body trembled as he stuttered, I'm Edmund. I have important information. I want to tell Captain Kent of the Sea Wolf." "Edmund? Oh my God. How did you become like this? Did you suffer some kind of curse?" The first mate, Neil, stood up and exclaimed loudly. He couldn't believe that the young man who was quite spirited the last time they met would end up like this in less than a month. As long as one wasn't blind, one could see that this body had completely decayed. Even the divine spells of a priest might not be able to save it. He, ha 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 ha. No. Mr. Vice Captain, I'm like this now because of a few people. They tied me and my friends up on rocks and cruelly threw us into the sea. But I was lucky. Before I drowned, I managed to break free from the ropes and secretly hid in the cave over there. Revenge. I need you to help me take revenge. Kill these bastards, especially that outsider. I want him to suffer unparalleled pain. Despair from the bottom of my heart. Kill. Eat. Edmund, who was no longer in his right mind, became more and more agitated as he spoke. In the end, he fell into a berserk state like a wild beast. His eyes emitted a terrifying blood-red light, and his mouth opened slightly to reveal a mouthful of white teeth. His fingernails grew at a speed visible to the naked eye, becoming claws in a matter of seconds. They constantly emitted a rotten stench. There was no doubt that he could no longer be called a human. He was now a low-level undead creature, a ghoul. However, the so-called low-level here was for professionals. In the eyes of ordinary people, it was still a monster that was difficult to defeat. What was even more terrifying was that the mutated corpses of these humanoid creatures could release terrifying plagues and viruses in battle. Any unlucky person who was scratched or bitten by them would have a high chance of being infected with something called ghoul fever. This thing would lie dormant in the body for a day and would quickly erupt. The victim would often die before a priest appeared. Within 4 days of death, the corpse would become a second ghoul, continuing to attack the living. To some extent, it was like a huge source of infection. As long as it spread one after another, it would not take long for a small town to become a paradise for the undead. Many evil necromancers liked to create a few ghouls and throw them into the sewers of some cities. They would attack the residents who passed by and slowly accumulate their numbers. When they finally released them all at once, the damage they could cause was simply indescribable with words. Looking at Edmund, who had completely turned into a ghoul, Kent, who had been expressionless all this while, suddenly smiled playfully. He asked the first mate behind him, Interesting. This is the crew you found for me? An idiot who was cursed for eating his own kind?" Orire was a world full of supernatural powers. There were many taboos that could not be broken, or there would be retribution. especially the gods with different personalities. They all had their own factions and standpoints. One of the gods once listed cannibalism as a heinous crime, and he personally cursed anyone who ate their own kind. There is a certain chance that they would be directly turned into ghouls, and Edmund happened to break this taboo. The shreds of flesh hanging from his teeth were enough to prove this point. Chapter 467. It might be a little difficult for normal people to distinguish the types of meat, but for someone like Seawolf Kent, who had killed countless people, he could easily tell from the color and texture of the meat. After all, human meat was very hydrated and was fundamentally different from most other types of meat. Many scholars believe that it had some sort of special magic, and that once a person became a cannibal, they would never be able to quit. They would continue to eat humans for the rest of their lives, even if it meant sacrificing their lives. In fact, in alchemy and necromancy, every part of the human body had different symbolic meanings and magical uses. For example, the heart represented life and could be used to create restorative items. The eyes represented reality and could be used to create items and potions that could see through invisibility. Bones and teeth represented death and were often used to store evil negative energy spells. As for human flesh, especially rotten flesh, it represented plagues, diseases, depravity, and the rebirth of the dead. Even normal people knew this. Seeing that the last trace of life on Edmund had completely disappeared, Vice Captain Neal sighed helplessly. "Ah, I'm very sorry, sir. I didn't think things would turn out like this. But don't worry. As the one who invited you, I will take responsibility and clean up everything." "Very well. Then I'll return to the ship and await your good news. Remember, no one can kill the crew of the Seawolf without paying a price. Let those arrogant bastards pay the price. I'll give you 2 hours. After 2 hours, I want all the residents of this island to disappear, and we'll use their blood to establish our name." After giving this bloodthirsty and cruel order, Kent turned and jumped into the boat. 2 loyal subordinates quickly followed, rowing with all their might. They quickly left the shore and headed for the large ship anchored in the distance. He didn't even look at Edmund, who had turned into a ghoul. It was as if the undead that ordinary people feared wasn't even worth mentioning to him. After watching the captain leave the beach, Neal slowly unsheathed the thin sword at his waist. He spoke in a heavy voice to the ghoul who hadn't completely lost his mind. "Edmund, I believe you should know what you've become by now. So, please tell me your last wish, or should I say your last words? I'll definitely fulfill it for you." Wish. I want revenge. I'm so hungry. I want to eat. Accompanied by a maniacal growl, Edmund's eyes abruptly shot out 2 beams of ferocious light. He pounced on the sailor closest to him like a wild beast, opening his mouth and tearing open the sailor's neck in one bite. He tore open the fresh red flesh, and in just a few short seconds, the area around the neck was completely devoured, leaving only white bones behind. Even though ghouls could retain their memories and intelligence from when they were alive, due to the corrosion of negative energy, their stomachs were always in a state of hunger. Once they smelled the scent of a living person, they would immediately go berserk. Under the control of his terrifying appetite, it was rare for him to communicate. Usually, meeting meant that a battle had begun. The current situation was just him revealing his true nature, so it was not worth making a fuss about. The bloody scene terrified many of the pirates, and they quickly drew their weapons and retreated. Only the first mate, Neal, remained unmoved. He muttered to himself in a pitiful tone, "Have they completely fallen? Since revenge is your last wish, I will fulfill it for you. Please rest in peace." Just as he finished speaking, he was like a cheetah, sprinting more than 10 meters away in an instant. The thin sword in his hand reflected a blinding golden light under the rays of the sunset. Before anyone could see clearly what had happened, a piercing scream rang out across the beach. "Ah!" A blade that was only 2 fingers wide had pierced through Edmund's brain. Even the victim beneath him had suffered the same fate. No one knew what kind of swordsmanship this old man in his 50s had used, but he had forcefully opened up 2 holes in the hardest part of a human skull. The edges of the incisions were very smooth, as if they had been polished with a tool. Clearly, even an undead creature like a ghoul could not survive after losing its brain. Its 4 limbs writhed and twitched a few times before it lay motionless on the ground, completely dead. Poor fellow. May your soul be able to rest in peace in the kingdom of the gods. If not, then may you have a good place in the abyss or hell. As he wiped off the blood and brain matter on his sword, he recited the eulogy in a low voice. He was so calm that it was as if he had not just killed a dangerous undead, but was just taking a stroll after a meal. Golden sunset, green seawater, pure white beach. The old man with thinning hair faced the sea breeze as he muttered something under his breath. His straight figure and meticulous etiquette made him look like a true gentleman. Of course, this was if one ignored the 2 corpses that emitted a strong smell of blood and the brain matter on the sharp, thin sword. Such a strange scene caused the 40-plus pirates to tremble all over. They all knew that their vice-captain had a very strange temper. He would never yell, nor would he say any insulting words. However, once he made a move, he would be exceptionally ferocious. He would never give the enemy any chance to retaliate. He was the type of dangerous person who would try his best not to speak if he could make a move. A pirate plucked up his courage and carefully took 2 steps forward. With a slightly trembling voice, he asked, Vice Captain, may I ask what we're going to do next? Neil expressionlessly sheathed his thin sword and smoothed his white hair that was messed up by the wind. The corner of his mouth raised slightly as he replied, Of course we are going to sweep the entire island. Didn't you hear the captain's order? Kill every living person you can see. Use blood and death to establish the prestige of the sea wolf. And also fulfill Edmund's last wish. Remember, I don't care what method you use. In short, you only have an hour and a half to clean up this island. You are not allowed to leave anything behind. Otherwise, I will personally take action. I believe you should be very clear about the consequences if I take action, right? As the last word fell, 2 rays of chilling light flashed in his eyes. His whole body emitted a terrifying aura. He did not seem like an old man at all. Instead, he seemed like an unsheathed sword that could pierce someone's heart at any time. Chapter 468. The pitiful pirates looked at each other and immediately felt as if a sharp blade had pierced into their hearts. Breathing became particularly difficult as they hurriedly nodded. Understood. I promised to complete the mission within the stipulated time. Then what are you still doing here? Hurry up and get moving. With that, Neil waved his hand and stood in place without saying a word. He stared at the sparse wooden houses on Sea Turtle Island with a cruel and bloodthirsty expression on his face. Vice Captain's orders. The time limit is 1.5 hours. Kill every living person on this island. Little ones. Charge. Wow. Kill. 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 Ha ha. I can have a good time again. I hope there are a few beautiful women on this island. I haven't gone ashore to vent for a long time. Dozens of pirates shouted as they rushed into the bushes. Not only did they not reject such an unscrupulous order, they were also very happy to carry it out. Not long after, the screams of men and the sorrowful cries of women could be heard from afar. There were also some scenes that made people blush. As a group of villains with no bottom line, they vented their bestial nature to their heart's content. The men were all killed, and the women were raped by at least 5 pirates in turn. Even children under the age of 10 were not spared. In just 10 minutes, the originally peaceful island had turned into a hell on earth. Several wooden houses were attacked, and the soaring flames reflected the gradually darkening sky red. Although the number of pirates was not large, if the residents could unite and resist, they might have a chance to defeat the other party and buy some time to escape. But unfortunately, because Sea Turtle Island was located on the periphery of the Sardinia Islands, it was often harassed and even massacred. Most of the residents had a deep psychological shadow in their subconscious, so only a few brave fellows fought back with weapons. In the blink of an eye, they were besieged and killed by several enemies. In addition, they were very scattered and had no time to react. The ferocious pirates were like locusts passing through, leaving behind only corpses and blazing flames that could be heard clearly even from a few kilometers away. At this moment, Andre was standing in front of the blacksmith shop. Looking down at the situation on the island, he muttered to himself, "It seems that the saying is right. The more you are afraid of something, the more it will happen. This is really a very dangerous situation. It seems that the preparations I made in advance will come in handy." Preparation? Aren't you going to hide in the woods for a while?" Fiona cried out in surprise. It could be seen that the girl's heart was filled with fear. Not only were her hands and feet trembling slightly, but the screams coming from afar made her recall the tragic memories of her childhood. That's right. I've long expected danger, so I've prepared some interesting gifts. I hope these pirates won't be too surprised. This island is too small and doesn't have enough space for us to hide. Even if we hide in the woods, we'll be found sooner or later. It's better to set up a trap and reduce the number of enemies to the greatest extent. Only then will we have a chance to escape. With that, Andre patted Fiona's shoulder comfortingly. A trace of a cold smile appeared on his face, and he turned his head to glance at the two wooden barrels wrapped in iron sheets next to the blacksmith shop. The barrels weren't filled with other miscellaneous items, but with granular black gunpowder mixed with iron sand. Once detonated, it would instantly blow up all living things within 30 meters into minced meat. In particular, the enormous kinetic energy generated by the explosion of the iron sand was enough to penetrate most armor. Even an elephant would be turned into a sieve if hit. It could be said that apart from leaving behind a small amount to reload the bronze guns, all of the sulfur, saltpeter, and charcoal that he'd purchased in Valen City were here. One had to know that Valen City wasn't Lincoln City. There were very few raw materials to concoct black gunpowder. Among them, sulfur was the most difficult to gather because it was mostly used to repel mosquitoes. Thus, most stores only had a few kilograms of it in stock. Even if one went through the entire market, they would only be able to buy 20 kilograms. Now, it was finally time to put it to good use. Looting, slaughtering the residents, raping the women, unbridled destruction and burning. The pirates' revelry became crazier and crazier as time passed. Having long lost their humanity, they didn't care at all whether they'd fall into the abyss after death, nor did they care about the laws and morals of the world. They enjoyed the pleasure of indulgence to their heart's content. Not long after, they passed through the shrubbery and appeared in sight. Seeing that the enemy had finally arrived, Andre didn't say anything else and directly took out a loaded gun and handed it to the girl behind him. "Here. If someone charges over in a moment, aim at their head or chest and pull the trigger." This is a weapon? For me? Fiona looked at the strangely shaped bronze gun in her hand and didn't know what to do. After all, she had never left Turtle Island since birth. She hadn't even touched a short sword or dagger for combat, not to mention a firearm with a complicated structure. Of course, this dagger is also for you to defend yourself. Remember not to be in a daze when the fight starts, and don't be soft-hearted. Otherwise, the fate of those residents will be an example. The pirates have made it clear that they want to carry out a massacre on this island. Even if you surrender, you won't be pardoned. So, give up all unrealistic fantasies. If you want to live, then prepare to fight with your life on the line. But now that things had progressed to this stage, Andre couldn't care less. He stuffed the cold steel dagger into the girl's arms and quickly opened the system at the same time, choosing to subclass as a wandering swordsman without hesitation. He was well aware of how dangerous the current situation was, so he had to raise his fighting ability to the maximum. Otherwise, with just this bit of gunpowder, he wouldn't be able to fend off the numerous pirates. He wouldn't hesitate even if he had to bear the 20% experience penalty in the future. Are you sure your first subclass is a wandering swordsman? Yes. Subclass, wandering swordsman. Search. The relevant subclass information is 100%. Meets the requirements. Congratulations. You have become a level 1 wandering swordsman. Because the level difference between the mage and wandering swordsman is more than 2 levels, you will only receive 80% of the normal experience in the future. Congratulations! You have obtained the ability, Weapon Proficiency. This ability allows you to use light weapons more efficiently, such as daggers, one-handed axes, one-handed scythes, inverted knives, light war hammers, short swords, hard-headed hammers, rapiers, and bare-handed attacks, etc. In battle, agility will replace strength as the most important reference attribute. Congratulations! You have obtained a special skill, Wandering Swordsman's Evasion. When you face a single opponent in close combat, you will become more difficult to hit. Congratulations! You have obtained the ability to wear light armor and proficiently use simple weapons and military weapons. Chapter 469. Name: Andre Blancheflower Race, Descendants of the Fire Elementals Alignment. Neutral Profession: Level 9 Mage / Level 1 Rogue. Swordsman experience required to level up: 109000 / 209000. Special Profession: Asser Dessers, chosen Level 1. Note: this profession cannot be leveled up with experience points. It can only be obtained through offering sacrifices to please this powerful fire elemental prince and gain his approval. Health points: 6969. Healthy. Experience points: 18,500. Undistributed. Warning: your sorcerer class is temporarily sealed. With a large amount of information appearing in his retina, Andre instantly felt countless knowledge about weapons, armor, dodging, attacking methods, and a series of messy knowledge, all gushing into his brain at once. It was as if he had just become a mage. His body naturally digested all the information. He immediately pulled out a thin sword that he had just finished forging in the afternoon and lightly waved it twice in the air. Instantly, there was a feeling of flesh and blood, as if this was not a sword, but an extension of his arm. Without a doubt, everything necessary for a level 1 rogue swordsman had become a part of his body. As long as he was willing, he could display a beautiful sword dance at any time. Taking advantage of the time before the enemy rushed down the slope, Andre quickly put on a set of inlaid leather armor. Although only the chest, shoulders, and arms were added with steel plates, the defense was not very good, but it would always be useful at a critical moment. After fully armed, the 4 bloodthirsty pirates finally ran up the slope, their eyes shining as they stared at Fiona, who was hiding behind and trembling. Ha 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 ha! Look, there's a beautiful girl there. A pirate licked his lips greedily, holding a bloody machete and shouting. Another pirate's eyes were shining as he exclaimed, "It's true. We're lucky. I reckon she should be the most beautiful woman on this island. And we actually beat her to it. **T. What are we waiting for? Let's quickly kill that pretty boy beside her. Then we can enjoy it together. When that pervert Luke comes, I'm afraid she'll become a disgusting corpse again. That's right. That pervert likes to rape corpses. I can't stand it anymore." As the 4 of them spoke, they fanned out and attacked from different corners. They had obviously fought together many times, and each of them was incomparably fierce. They didn't hesitate in the slightest just because Andre was armed. Perhaps in the eyes of the pirates, an underage boy like him could only put on airs and could not possibly be a powerful warrior. Unfortunately, they were wrong this time. Moreover, they were very wrong. Seeing that the enemy was getting closer and closer to him, Andre's lips curled up into a chilling sneer. He immediately pulled out 2 muskets, aimed at the pirates approaching from the left and right, and pulled the trigger. Bang! Bang! Only 2 loud noises and white smoke could be heard as the targets fell to the ground. The lead bullet, under the huge propelling force of the gunpowder, instantly shot into the pirates' heads. The 2 of them didn't even have the chance to scream before their souls were taken away by the Grim Reaper, leaving behind 2 lifeless corpses that fell to the ground with a plop. Hit the vitals. Critical strike activated. Dealt 20 damage to the pirate. Target's brain has been destroyed. Death. Obtained 40 experience points. Already reduced by 20%. Hit the vitals. Critical strike activated. dealt 27 damage to the pirate. Target's brain has been destroyed. Death. Obtained 40 experience points, already reduced by 20%. Looking at the information that appeared in his vision, Andre immediately experienced the power of the double profession experience points punishment. The pirates that should have received 50 experience points now only received 40, and 10 of them were wasted. However, now was not the time to be distressed over the experience points. Because the other two pirates would reach him in a few seconds, he didn't hesitate to throw the two muskets on the ground and pulled out a third. He turned around and fired. In an instant, a large hole was opened in the chest of the pirate who was trying to sneak attack him. It seemed like the pirate's heart was shattered, and he fell to the ground with a plop, his body twitching nonstop. The four evil pirates aggressively rushed forward, and in the blink of an eye, 3 of them were dead. Only one guy with a sinister expression was left. He raised his sharp, curved sword and viciously slashed down. Arrogant brat, go to hell for me. Not knowing if it was because of the sudden death of his companions, his whole body was like a demon from the abyss. Just from momentum, it seemed like he wanted to split Andre into 2 halves. Because of the excessive force in his arms, a large amount of his muscles were red, and his veins were bulging. However, Andre didn't put him in his eyes. Instead, he laughed contemptuously and muttered to himself, Next, let me personally test the true close combat standard of a rogue swordsman. After saying that, he threw the last shotgun on the ground and quickly pulled out the thin sword hanging at his waist. Just as the scimitar was about to fall, he waved his arm like lightning and stabbed the target's 2 knees 4 times in a row. Then, he moved sideways and passed by the scimitar. The poor pirate didn't even have time to react to what happened. He only felt a sharp pain, and his legs could no longer stand straight. He immediately fell to the ground, and dark red blood stained his pants red in a short few seconds. Damn it! Damn it! Legs! My legs! Why are my legs listening to me? When he found that he couldn't stand up, his whole body fell into a state of collapse. He screamed and yelled at the top of his lungs, as if he had gone mad. In fact, in that moment, Andre had already used his thin sword to cut the ligaments of the pirate's knee joint. Relying on his high agility of 17 points and the bonus of a rogue swordsman's light weapons, he easily found the weak point of the opponent's lower body and ended this short battle. Glancing at the wailing, unlucky pirate, Andre shook off the blood on his thin sword and muttered to himself, so that's how it is. The so-called rogue swordsman uses nimble speed to avoid attacks, and at the same time, uses high intelligence to find the weak point of the opponent's body. Then, at the crucial moment, he kills with a single strike. He can even create an illusion of an attack to confuse the opponent. He belongs to the category of a skilled swordsman and really suits my taste. Chapter 470. Fast, efficient, agile. That was a precise observation ability. Excellent tactical mind. Mixing all these together was the fighting style of the wandering swordsman. It was neither like a thief who needed to attack from the dark to exert the greatest advantage, nor was it like a warrior who used strength, endurance, and strong physique to defeat the opponent. It was more like a profession that was born for duels. In a one-on-one situation with equal strength, it was difficult to find a second melee profession that could defeat the wandering swordsman. Although he had never thought of using experience points to improve the profession level of the wandering swordsman, Andre could not help but begin to imagine the special ability that could only be mastered at level 3, Crafty Strike. If he was not mistaken, this should be a feint that was often mentioned in martial arts novels. Through the angle of attack, the eyes, and the clever brain, it created a feint to create a diversion, forcing the opponent to attack or defend according to the script. It could be said that it was equivalent to indirectly controlling the enemy in the battle. Imagine, when 2 melee professions were in a duel, and one of them had already predicted the opponent's next move, or the next few moves, what would the result be? Obviously, as long as there was no accident, the party who could predict the opponent's movements would definitely win. This was the biggest advantage of the Wandering Swordsman. After testing the melee ability of the Wandering Swordsman and the essence of the profession, Andre was not interested in continuing to listen to the last pirate's wail. He backhanded his sword and pierced the left side of his chest. The sharp, fine steel sword pierced between the two ribs, and it took less than a second to mince the beating heart. As the thin sword was slowly pulled out, a large amount of blood flowed out of the wound, and it flowed faster and faster. Soon, a small pool of sticky blood was formed on the ground. The pirate only felt his vision darkening a little, and after 10 seconds, he completely lost consciousness and fell to the ground, motionless. He had completely lost his life. Fiona, who was standing not far away, had a look of disbelief in her eyes. She tightly grasped the gun and dagger in her hand. She opened her mouth and wanted to exclaim, but she didn't know why she didn't make any sound. Her wheat-colored skin suddenly turned red, not knowing whether it was due to excitement or nervousness. She didn't dare to imagine that the powerful and terrifying pirates in the depths of her memory would be so weak. In the blink of an eye, 4 of them had fallen, especially the loud roar of the muskets and the terrible wounds caused by the lead bullets tearing through the skin and muscles. It made people shudder after seeing it. After all, if one died by a sword, they would at least know how they died. However, after a loud bang from a gun, they would immediately turn into a corpse that was beyond recognition. They wouldn't even know what happened at the moment of death. In the Oyer continent, anything that people could not understand would be categorized as magic. Hence, in the girl's opinion, these strangely shaped weapons must be some kind of powerful alchemy weapon. Otherwise, how could they have blasted the pirate's head into pieces so quickly? Just as she carefully turned the muzzle to see what kind of mechanism was inside, Andre immediately reminded her, "Stop. Don't point the barrel at yourself. It's very dangerous. If you accidentally fire, your head will immediately explode like this garbage." Fiona was so scared that her hand trembled, and she almost threw the gun to the ground. But fortunately, she reacted quickly and calmed down in time. Otherwise, if the gun fell to the ground, the bullets and gunpowder inside would have spilled out. Looking at the girl's flustered look, Andre let out a helpless sigh. He took out a small handful of gunpowder and a lead pellet from his pouch. He picked up one of the guns on the ground and used the tools he carried with him to clean up the residue. Then, he placed the pellet and pellet into the barrel of the gun. The entire process was done skillfully. After the demonstration, he tried to use a gentle tone and asked, "How is it? Did you see it clearly? This is the way to load the gun. In a while, there will be more enemies. I may not be able to block all the pirates onto the slope. You have to shoot the guys who rush up one by one. Do you understand?" The operation of the front-loading musket was not complicated. As long as you remember the process, any adult with normal intelligence could easily learn it. The only difficulty was the control of the gunpowder. If it was too little, it would cause the bullet to be less lethal. If it was too much, it would directly blow up the barrel. Of course, in addition to this, using firearms also required a very strong psychological quality. At least when you see the enemy rushing towards you, you must not panic and be unable to quickly load the gun. Obviously, Fiona's psychological quality was certainly not calm, but she obviously had no experience in using cold weapons, so the simple operation of the gun became the only choice. After all, there were a total of 4 guns. If all of them were loaded, they could kill or injure 4 targets. Using them in rotation, there should be no problem for self-protection. Resisting the discomfort of the corpses and the smell of blood, Fiona clenched her teeth and nodded gently. I understand. Very good. Just follow what I just did. Now repeat it immediately and fill the empty gun on the ground," Andre said as he took off the ammunition bag and the gunpowder bag hanging on his waist and threw them on the ground together. He knew very well that the girl must be very scared at the moment, but he still forced her to learn how to kill her own kind. Otherwise, in the next battle, a pure burden would definitely greatly increase the difficulty of escaping. In addition, he also wanted to conduct a small psychological experiment. Fiona had never had her own opinion. Although she was very scared, she still followed the requirements and picked up an empty gun. She quickly cleaned up the gunpowder residue with a tool and then learned from Andre. She grabbed a small handful of gunpowder and poured it into the barrel. Then she stuffed a lead bullet into it and pressed it firmly. She presented it with trembling hands and waited for the evaluation. Watching the girl complete the loading in half a minute, Andre finally showed a satisfied smile. Not bad, very fast, and the amount of gunpowder filled is just right. Remember the process just now. Even if there are pirates rushing over with the gun, you must fill it according to the steps just now. Now, aim at the head or chest of the corpse in front of you and pull the trigger. Pull the trigger. Fiona's eyes widened, and her face was full of disbelief. She had seen with her own eyes how terrifying the power of the weapon in her hand was. In addition, she had never killed anyone before. Her hands and feet were trembling slightly. Obviously, she was extremely scared. Chapter 471. Yes, pull the trigger. Don't hesitate. Think about what they wanted to do to you just now. Now you have to learn to use it to protect yourself. Andre pointed at the corpse of the pirate whose heart was pierced by him and answered firmly. Fiona was not a fool. When she was a child, she had seen how miserable the fate of the girls who were raped by pirates was. Her brain was quickly occupied by fear and anger. She raised the flintlock shakily and pulled the trigger subconsciously. Bang! With a loud noise, the pirate's head was instantly smashed like a rotten watermelon. The part above the nose was directly smashed into pieces. There was no trace of a human being at all. The penetration of a musket and a primitive lead bullet may not be comparable to modern firearms, but the wound area was absolutely amazing. It could even reach 100 times the cross-section of a bullet. Especially the horn-shaped cavity, normal people could not help but feel goosebumps all over their body. If you were accidentally hit, then you would not be a doctor, but begging the enemy to give you another shot, because that kind of pain was unbearable for 99% of people. It was better to die early. Staring at the corpse that was beyond recognition, Fiona was stunned. She looked at the flintlock that was still smoking in her hand for a while, and then looked at the half of the head that was blown apart. It was as if she was recalling the feeling when she pulled the trigger just now. It was as if she had fallen into a state of confusion. How is it? Do you have the feeling of holding power but can't stop? Andre's mouth was slightly raised as he asked very playfully. He had already noticed that after the girl fired the gun, her hands no longer trembled. The fear in her eyes also slowly disappeared as if she had found her backbone. As a person who had experienced it, he was very clear that when he had just become a mage, he also had a similar experience. He knew how fascinating that wonderful feeling was. A scholar once said that human beings were a race that was loyal to their own desires. The desire for power, the pursuit of power, the fanaticism for money, the obsession for the beauty of the opposite sex, and even the so-called heroes with noble character. Most of them were just for the sake of a resounding reputation. In essence, they also belonged to a part of their desires. Since they were loyal to their desires, it meant that in the bottom of everyone's heart, there was actually some kind of hidden desire. From the elderly in their 70s or 80s to the children around 10 years old. Once they found out that they suddenly had the ability to easily kill their own kind, more than 70% of them would fall into ecstasy. Many perverted serial killers came about this way. This was similar to how most ordinary people would have the urge to shoot at a crowd when they held a gun in their hands. If they held a sharp sword in their hands, they would have the desire to stab it into someone's stomach. Perhaps it was just like the saying that everyone had two completely different characteristics in their hearts. One was an angel, and the other was a demon. Most of the time, people were bound by the laws and morals of the secular world. So most of the time, their angelic side prevailed. However, when their spirit and consciousness were greatly stimulated and they happened to possess power that surpassed ordinary people, then the devil side that was suppressed in the bottom of their hearts would awaken. Andre now wanted to know if the girl, who was standing in a daze, would continue to maintain her kind nature after discovering a way to easily kill the pirates, Or would she completely turn evil and start killing her former enemies? It had to be said that this idea was very disgusting. It felt like forcibly manipulating or changing a person's fate. Feel? Hee hee ha 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 ha. After a short silence, Fiona suddenly burst into laughter. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable madness. She muttered to herself, yes, this feeling is simply great. I want to kill all the pirates. They deserve to die. They all deserve to die. Seeing the girl sliding from one side of the scale to the other at a very fast speed, Andre did not have the intention to stop her. Instead, he showed a hint of surprise and immediately said, yes, those pirates deserve to die. You now have a little ability to hunt them. Do you want more now? More? Can you give me more power? Fiona, who had completely fallen into some kind of extreme emotion, rushed up and asked excitedly without any precaution. Andre smiled and nodded. Of course. Now kneel down and repeat after me. Convey the anger in your heart that longs to destroy everything. Without saying a word, Fiona knelt directly on the ground, raised her head, and waited with a fanatical face. She had now completely lost the ability to think. Her mind was full of how to get more power, and then kill every pirate in sight to avenge her parents who died tragically when she was a child. There was nothing in the world that could stimulate a person's potential more than unforgettable hatred. There is also no emotion that could be buried in the bottom of the heart for decades like hatred. Not only would it not fade with the passage of time, but it would deepen every time it was recalled. Seeing her father being beheaded with her own eyes, and her mother dying after enduring a few hours of humiliation. In this case, even a person with no temper would be furious and accumulate unimaginable hatred. Because she was a weak girl before, Fiona knew that she could never be the opponent of the ferocious pirates. She could only hide her hatred silently. But now it was different. She had obtained the ability to kill ordinary pirates. The anger of revenge was quickly filling every corner of her body, and she was caught up in the desire for revenge. Andre was very satisfied with her psychological state at the moment. He stretched out his right hand and gently pressed it on the girl's forehead. He narrowed his eyes and recited loudly in a very solemn tone, "The great prince of fire elements, Isoldezer, you are the master of the angry flames of the elemental world, the embodiment of the ultimate power of fire and the embodiment of destruction. Please allow me to call your name, and I am willing to be your traveler in the material world. Spread your name, and win the awe of mortals with destruction and burning. The great prince of fire elements, Isoldezer, you are." Fiona repeated word for word, and as the recitation got longer and longer, she became more and more excited, especially her eyes, which were completely in an ethereal state, as if she had completely integrated into another world. This was a kind of wholehearted devotion, releasing one's spirit, consciousness, and thoughts. Only in this way could one be recognized by powerful creatures from other planes and obtain the power they gave. Chapter 472. The Prince of Fire Elemental, Isoldezer, was the opposite of the indifference shown by most of his kind. He was one of the few elemental lords who were keen to see mortals revere him. He especially liked humans who were filled with the desire to destroy and was willing to respond to similar calls and make them his priests to spread destruction and panic in the material world. Of course, this destruction was not necessarily an evil act, because the specific city or village to burn was up to the priest's own judgment. If he was inclined to good, then he would destroy the lawless places where evil ran rampant, such as Wayland, the city of pirates. If he was inclined to evil, then he would unscrupulously destroy in order to please the master he served and obtain a higher priest level. As the prince of the fire elemental world, Isoldezer did not care about his priest camp. As long as he could win the respect of mortals, he would be happy to reward them with power. Obviously, Fiona was full of hatred and desire to kill and destroy, which suited the Prince of Fire Elemental very well. Andre used himself as a medium to connect the two with almost no effort. Coupled with the special ability of Agent of Faith, he soon felt a stream of energy slowly flowing into his body and then into the top of the girl's head. A dark blue flame suddenly emerged from his palm, exactly the same as the one produced by burning anger. But this time, the flame did not burn Fiona's skin. Instead, it branded a black flame-shaped mark on her forehead. At the same time, a large amount of information began to appear in her retina. Agent of Faith ability activated. Detecting target's perception attribute. Detection result. Target's perception is 14, exceeding the minimum requirement. Beginning construction of the Bridge of Faith. Bridge construction completed. Target has been recognized by the Prince of Fire Elemental, Isol Deezer, officially becoming a level 1 priest. With a powerful energy gushing out from Fiona's body, she suddenly stood up, raised her hands, and shouted, Isol Deezer, Great Prince of Fire Elemental, you are my faith, my everything. With the flames as my witness, from now on, I will serve you as my master and walk the world in your name, so that more mortals will revere your name. In an instant, the powerful energy quickly condensed and formed a wonderful rune, then slowly disappeared and finally returned to normal. The unique holy aura of priests surrounded the girl. Although she had not gone through systematic learning, she was now a level 1 priest and could use level 0 and level 1 divine spells. In fact, priests should be regarded as the most special of all professions. Most of their power came from the gods, so, generally speaking, as long as their perception attribute was enough and their faith was pious enough, it was basically a sure thing. As for the promotion of profession level, it all depended on the personality of the god. Some gods were more old-fashioned and gave their priests a corresponding level based on the contributions they made. Some gods were more flexible and promoted their priests based on their mood and personal preferences. There were also gods who liked to be flattered. The better the flatterer, the more they would be rewarded. Coincidentally, the Prince of Fire Elemental particularly liked mortals who had strong hatred, killing intent, anger, and the desire to destroy. In addition, he had been isolated from the material world for too long and urgently needed some priests to use destruction to restore reverence. So he did not hesitate to establish a link of faith with Fiona. After all, as an elemental lord, he did not need the faith of mortals like most gods. The only thing he wanted was reverence. The more the mortals were afraid, flustered, and angry but did not dare to speak, the more powerful power he could draw from them. Looking at the determined and fanatical expression on Fiona's face, Andre suddenly realized that faith was really a terrible thing. In just a few minutes, it had completely changed an ignorant girl into another person. In particular, there was a flash of killing intent in her eyes. Even a strong-willed transmigrator like him, whose hands were stained with blood, could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. But thinking about it, it was no wonder. Even in the 21st century, where technology and culture were highly developed, there was still a large group of idiots who were bewitched by religion. They were willing to joke with their lives, launch terrorist attacks everywhere, and act as suicide bombers. They could not even prove the existence of the gods they believed in. Just relying on the so-called doctrines that had been tampered with countless times, they were used as idiots by the ambitious. This world was originally full of barbarism and ignorance. In addition, the gods here not only really existed, but could also bestow great power to their believers, as well as the promise of eternal life in the kingdom of God after death. Naturally, people were particularly eager to join them. Occasionally, there would be some irrational guys who were called fanatics. Obviously, Fiona's state at the moment was very much like a fanatic. After the ceremony was completed, she knelt on the ground with a pious face and deeply kissed the back of Andre's right hand. The only elector of Aesir Dessel in the material world, the 20th Flaming Duke, Andre Blanchflower, please allow me to offer my loyalty to you and become your sword and shield. I accept your loyalty. Get up before the other pirates arrive. We still have a lot of preparation work to do. With that, Andre pulled the girl up from the ground. He was very clear that Fiona was not really loyal to him, but to the elector of Acer-Dessel. All the people in Oriar knew that priests were only loyal to the gods they served, because that was the source of their power. Once betrayed, it would lead to extremely serious consequences. At least the priest level would be abolished, and, at worst, they would be hunted down by the church. If the god was inclined to evil, it was likely that even the soul would not be able to rest in peace after death. It could be said that from the moment a priest was accepted by God, there was no turning back. Once the god they served died, except for a few wise men who could see through everything, most priests would have a nervous breakdown and fall into inextricable madness. More serious ones would even take the initiative to commit suicide. Fiona, who had been dominated by hatred, was not very clear about what kind of path she had embarked on. While feeling the divine power bestowed by the Prince of Fire, she asked softly, "Master, what should we do next? Those pirates will soon blockade the entire island. Now, they will never let go of any fishing boat that goes out to sea." Chapter 473. Of course, it's to set up a trap and let these evil pirates know what retribution is. I believe that Prince Acer-Dessel will definitely like the slaughter and death brought about by explosions and flames. After saying that, Andre's silver-white hair was blown by the sea breeze, and a cold smile appeared on his face. Although he was unable to take the initiative to launch a frenzied retaliation against the pirates due to the loss of his profession as a mage, he could not help but feel enraged when he saw the peaceful and quiet island turned into a mess with blood flowing like a river, no matter how well-mannered he was. As a transmigrator who came from an era of information explosion, what he hated the most was aimless destruction, spreading chaos and panic. This was especially true when it came to pirates, who destroyed everything in their path just to vent their selfish desires. It was the easiest way to arouse the disgust in his heart. In fact, this was not because he was soft-hearted or kind-hearted. To some extent, Andre should be regarded as the more emotionless type. He would not erupt with a strong sense of justice when he saw people being killed, nor would he overestimate himself and provoke those powerful evil organizations. If a word had to be used to describe him, he should be regarded as a creature of profit. He could tolerate all wars for profit, and he could also accept the raising of a butcher's knife in order to create more value. In his view, any act of destruction should not exist alone, but should be based on creation. Although it sounded very contradictory and could even be said to be a little strange, if one thought carefully, in fact, every progress of human society, such as the progress of form and consciousness, the Industrial Revolution, the discovery and application of new energy, was accompanied by great turmoil and destruction. There was even the possibility of unimaginable and terrible wars breaking out. Countless people died because of this, and more people lost their relatives and friends, wandering the ruins all day long without a home to return to. But the destruction brought about by this kind of war was not meaningless. It was to overthrow some inherent and backward things, and then establish a new order. Think about how much people's living standards had improved from the end of World War II to the information age. All kinds of technology, political system, justice, entertainment, information, and so on had improved by more than 10 times. This was the creation and development brought about by destruction. But what the pirates were doing now was completely different. They did not create anything, just pure destruction. In particular, they wantonly slaughtered civilians, which made Andre extremely unhappy. After all, in this world where productivity was relatively low, population was definitely the most important standard to measure the strength of a race. It had to be noted that the entire continent was in a state of lack of population. Although after the rise of the Magic Empire, human beings were known as the sixth master of the world after the creator race, giants, dragons, elves, and dwarves, their range of activity was still pathetically small. Most of the areas still maintained large areas of primeval forests, and they did not have much of an advantage over other races. Even the goblins, Orcs, half-orcs, kobolds, ogres, trolls, and other monsters that lived in the wild could pose a great threat to the human world from time to time, not to mention the giant dragons that could easily turn a city into ruins once they appeared. As a person who maintained absolute rationality most of the time, Andre could not understand the purpose of an indiscriminate massacre. If he wanted to establish his dominance, killing a portion of those who had a particularly strong spirit of resistance would definitely achieve his goal. If the purpose was to completely destroy the opponent's will, then the effect of cruel torture was definitely 10 times better than killing. If he wanted to suppress the rebellion as quickly as possible, the 11 draws was definitely the best choice. If he wanted to plunder more wealth, kidnapping, threats, and intimidation would always be more effective than violent methods. Pure slaughter and destruction wouldn't bring any benefits and would even cause a lot of unnecessary losses. Perhaps it was because the pirates couldn't see through this that they had been suppressed in this small archipelago. Otherwise, with their strength and a reasonable system, they would have built a country of their own that wouldn't be inferior to any city-state. Stupid or arrogant. Today, let me see with my own eyes what the pirates, the number one enemy of Linden's city, are capable of, Andre muttered to himself as he threw the corpses of the 4 pirates on a slope. At the same time, he hid 4 barrels of gunpowder in the surroundings and used a small amount of gunpowder as fuses to connect them. This could ensure that at the moment of explosion, the iron sand in the barrels could sweep a radius of tens of meters and form a 360-degree penetrative killing without any blind spots. It was estimated that even with a shield and armor, it would be useless. After finishing the arrangement, the next thing to do was to wait. Not knowing if it was because of the gunshots, it did not take long for a large number of pirates to pass through the woods and appear at the bottom of the slope. There were as many as 20 to 30 people. They're here. They're finally here. They will become my first sacrifice to the great Sortisil this evening. Only flames and destruction will last forever. Looking at the increasing number of enemies, Fiona did not tremble like before. Instead, she was particularly excited. The power of hatred seemed to have successfully dispelled the psychological shadow, but it pushed her from one extreme to another extreme. However, Andre did not have the optimism of the girl, because he had already seen the medium-sized pirate ship docked in the bay. Judging from the size of the ship and the displacement of the ship, the number of enemies was at least 300, and the pirates in front of him were only 1/10 of the total. Even if he could kill all of them, it would not affect the overall situation. It should be known that his true strength was only that of a level 1 rogue swordsman. In a situation where he did not use a flintlock, he could at most deal with 3 to 4 pirates at the same time. If there were more, he could only choose to turn around and run. After all, pirates would not talk about one-on-one combat or chivalry. They were a group of people who could not be stopped. They would try anything that could help them kill the enemy, including throwing knives, throwing lime into the opponent's eyes, and even defecating and urinating during the battle. All in all, this was a group of scoundrels with no moral integrity at all. Expecting them to abide by the so-called morality was more realistic than expecting pigs to climb trees. Fortunately, in Andre's plan, there was no need to fight the pirates head-on. He only needed to reduce their numbers and avenge the tragic deaths of the residents. Then, he would take advantage of the chaos to sneak into the pirate ship and follow them to Valen City. Chapter 474. Wasn't there a saying that the most dangerous place was the safest place? Perhaps even the pirates wouldn't have thought that there would be someone hiding in their own cabin. Of course, it wasn't easy to do this. The first and most important thing was to clean up a portion of the pirates, and the number couldn't be too small. Andre, who had been a captain for a period of time, was very clear about the amazing use of space in the hull of this world, especially the lounge of the ordinary sailors. It could be described as stacked on top of each other. Often, a narrow space could be placed with 7 or 8 hammocks. If the number of pirates couldn't be greatly reduced, leaving a certain amount of space in the cabin, he was afraid that even if the infiltration was successful, it wouldn't take long for him to be exposed. Sigh, I really don't know how long we're going to have to hide like this. If only we could use the fireball magic wand, we could easily kill a few hundred pirates in a few rounds. We wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Andre grumbled helplessly. Since the wizard profession was sealed, many of the things he had carefully prepared had lost their function. For example, the powerful wand, the teleportation ring that could only be activated by a wizard, the secondary defense staff, and the stack of arcane scrolls in the scroll box had all become decorations without exception. Even summoning a magic pet was useless. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been forced to take on the role of a wandering swordsman and receive a penalty of 20% experience points. That was 20% experience points. As the profession level got higher and higher, the amount of experience points required was getting closer to an astronomical figure. Perhaps 20% was only about 20,000 now, but it would certainly increase in the future. It wouldn't be surprising if it eventually became hundreds of thousands. But there was no other way. Everything was to safely get through this period of weakness. Anyway, the ability Raging Flame Eruption wouldn't disappear after one use. Maybe in the future, he would need to use it again when he needed to go all out. So, it was better to take on a melee profession as a precaution. At least he would have some ability to protect himself, and he wouldn't be completely reduced to an ordinary person. Just as Andre was secretly annoyed at the losses he had suffered, the gathered pirates began to move along the slope halfway up the mountain. Although the sky was now beginning to darken, they could still see the young man and woman looking down at them from above, as well as the bodies of 4 of their companions. In fact, the area of Turtle Island itself was not large, and there were only a few dozen households. After more than an hour of devastation, most of them were basically dead. Even if there were 1 or 2 fish that escaped the net, they had nowhere to run. When the forest was set on fire, no matter where they hid, they would not be able to escape death. As everyone knew, tropical plants had a particularly high moisture content, so when they burned, they would release a large amount of smoke that was harmful to the human body. If one hid inside, even if they didn't burn to death, they would be suffocated to death by the smoke. This was also the reason why the pirates didn't give chase when they saw the scattered residents escaping. Instead, they pointed and laughed. However, they probably wouldn't have the chance to do so today. From the moment they stepped onto the hillside, the Grim Reaper had already appeared above the island, silently waiting to harvest their souls. Remember, don't be impulsive later. Stay at the back and shoot with your gun, understand? Andre warned the girl behind him. He could feel that there was not much rationality left in Fiona's brain at the moment. Half of it was occupied by strong hatred, and the other half wholeheartedly dedicated to the Prince of Fire, Soldisul. Maybe she would really rush up like a madman. Well, you are the chosen one of the great Soldisul. You are its spokesperson in the material world. I will obey all your orders. Although she was a little reluctant, Fiona still nodded and agreed. While the two were talking, 20 to 30 armed pirates finally entered the range of the trap. As expected, they began to slow down and check the bodies of their companions, trying to find the cause of death. Seeing this scene, Andre couldn't help but slightly raise the corner of his mouth, showing a very evil smile. He directly took out the alcohol lighter that he carried with him and gently fiddled with the flint. The red and blue flame quickly sprang out, emitting a weak light. The expression on his face was particularly gloomy and terrifying. I suggest you plug your ears now, because the next movement may be relatively big, and the scene will be quite tragic. No need. I'm already a priest of the Lord of Raging Flame. I will not be frightened by a little noise. Not to mention, I want to hear the screams of these scum before they die. I believe it will be very beautiful. Fiona's eyes revealed a deep hatred. This is not a little noise, but forget it as long as you like it. Andre shrugged and threw the alcohol lighter in a low voice. Sizzle. The black gunpowder scattered on the ground was instantly ignited and burned in the direction of the wooden barrels at a rapid speed. In just a few seconds, it appeared in the sight of the pirates, attracting many people to stop and watch. They were completely unaware of the terrifying explosion that was about to happen and had no intention of extinguishing it. Boom, 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 boom. Accompanied by a deafening explosion, the 4 barrels of gunpowder instantly released a terrifying amount of energy, especially the iron sand flying in the air. They released a powerful kinetic energy, and those who were lucky had their heads or hearts pierced. Those who were lucky had their heads or hearts pierced. Those who were unlucky had their bodies pierced through like a sieve. They fell to the ground and struggled in pain, letting out heart-wrenching screams that made people shudder. What was even more frightening was that the explosion just now also caused a landslide. Many head-sized rocks rolled down from high places, giving the lucky ones who did not enter the range of the explosion a final blow. Blood, minced meat, broken limbs, and internal organs all over the ground. Countless wounded people desperately struggled on the ground, trying to reduce the pain they suffered. This is... Fiona was stunned and stuttered for a long time, not knowing what to say. She originally thought that the so-called noise and power were at most a little stronger than the flintlock in her hand, but the fact was far beyond her expectations. In an instant, more than 2/3 of the enemies were killed, and the rest were basically injured. After all, the amount of iron sand in the gunpowder barrels was very large. After the explosion, the power was equivalent to 4 oversized bullets. Perhaps the penetrating power was a little weaker, but it was absolutely impossible to completely avoid it. Even a legendary thief with more than 20 dexterity could not avoid hundreds of iron sand flying rapidly after the explosion. Chapter 475. Hee. The effect is a little better than I imagined. It seems that the saying that knowledge is power is indeed true. Although I have temporarily lost the power of a mage, it does not mean that I have lost my knowledge and wisdom. After saying that, Andre pulled out the rapier and mithril machete from his waist and rushed straight towards the disabled pirates. Soon, a reign of terror was set off as he mercilessly reaped the lives of the enemies and also gained a lot of experience points. Fiona, who had recovered from her shock, was not to be outdone. She raised her flintlock and aimed at those who were limping and trying to escape. She pulled the trigger and shot them one by one. It did not take long for the opponents to be completely slaughtered. Not a single one was left alive. At the moment when the last unlucky bastard breathed his last, Andre instantly felt a bone-piercing chill behind his back, as if he was being stared at by some ferocious beast. He did not dare to be negligent and immediately turned around to hand out the rapier. At the same time, he slightly bent his knees and placed the machete horizontally in front of his chest. With a very strange posture, he blocked a sharp rapier that was coming from behind at a tricky angle. Clang! Along with the sound of weapons colliding, Andre finally saw who attacked him. It was an old man who was over 50 years old. His hair was sparse but meticulously groomed. He was wearing a tight suit without any protective function. His eyes were like an eagle staring at its prey, emitting a sharp light. The rapier in his hand was quite gorgeous, especially the exquisite carvings and patterns on the hilt. With one look, one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. His swordsmanship was quite superb. If he had not reacted fast enough, his heart would have been pierced, and he would have fallen into a pool of blood and slowly waited for death. Thinking that he had almost lost his life, Andre immediately broke out in a cold sweat. With lingering fear, he asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" The old man smiled playfully. His wrist shook violently and instantly swung away the weapons that were clasped together. He quickly took 2 steps back and very elegantly performed a sword salute. "My name is Neil Grant, the vice captain of the Sea Wolf, a level 6 rogue swordsman. I really didn't expect to meet another rogue swordsman on such a desolate island. Your reaction just now was pretty good. You were actually able to parry my attack in the midst of danger, and you were also very smart. You used a trap to wipe out more than 30 of my subordinates. If Captain Kent knew about this, he would definitely go crazy. After all, the number of qualified sailors these days is decreasing day by day. Every pirate ship has a headache because they can't recruit enough people, but you killed so many experienced crew members in one go. Tell me, What should I do with you?" He muttered to himself as he circled the area. His eyes never left Andre's shoulders, especially the ground beneath his feet. It gave off the illusion that he could attack at any moment. Without a doubt, this was some kind of combat footwork. Once it moved, it would be as elusive as a snake. Andre had seen many high-level close combat professions. He knew that the opponent was looking for weaknesses and loopholes in his defense, so he didn't dare to move. Otherwise, he would quickly reveal the fact that he was a beginner. At the same time, he gave Fiona, who was trying to shoot with a flintlock, a look that told her to calm down. He didn't think that the most primitive musket could threaten a level 6 rogue swordsman who was agile and vigilant at a distance of more than 30 meters. Neil saw all the little movements and nodded approvingly. Not bad, a very wise choice. If that girl had made any threatening moves, she would have been dead by now. I like people who know when to advance and retreat, especially a young and smart guy like you. How about it? Are you interested in joining the Sea Wolf to be a happy pirate? If you agree, I'll treat it as if nothing happened. Anyway, to Captain Kent, exchanging a mere 30 ordinary pirates for a professional with limitless potential is definitely a profitable business. You can also learn some combat skills of a true wandering swordsman from me, such as crafty strike. The moment the last word was uttered, the old man, who was over 50 years old, suddenly exerted his strength and rushed forward in less than a second. The thin sword, which was less than 2 fingers wide, was raised high above his head, like a bull stretching its horn forward. Just when Andre thought that the opponent would definitely stab straight at him and make a cross defense, Neil's face immediately revealed a strange smile. Neil used his left foot as the center and made a 180-degree turn in the middle of the sprint, abruptly changing the direction of the stab. The stab that was originally coming from the front immediately became a side stab. Damn it! Seeing the sharp sword tip getting closer and closer to his temple, Andre secretly cursed. He forced himself to lean back and barely avoided the fatal blow. He could even see the hair on his forehead that was cut off. But it wasn't over yet. Just when the stab was halfway completed, Neil once again forcibly stopped the momentum of the sword and fiercely pulled back, forcefully drawing a line of blood on Andre's neck. After doing all this, he didn't continue to attack. Instead, he put away the thin sword and asked with a smile, "How was it? Did you feel the power of crafty strike? Only a wandering swordsman of level 3 and above can grasp this technique. It allows the opponent to make a series of attacks that they can't dodge in time. Furthermore, every step is planned in the mind. So, from the very beginning, your defeat was already destined." Andre touched the blood flowing out from his throat, his eyes revealing a look of horror. He completely believed that if this old man in front of him hadn't killed him, his throat would have already begun to spurt blood. Unbelievable. Although he had long read about the characteristics of crafty strike in books, after experiencing it for himself, he realized that this ability was simply like cheating. Not only did it fully utilize the inertia of the human body to avoid danger, it even included the reaction of the next few steps. Unless one had extraordinary combat talent or physical fitness, it would be very difficult to escape from this kind of continuous and strange attack. At the very least, he couldn't do it now. But it was a pity that it was just as Neil had said. This ability could only be grasped by a wandering swordsman of level 3 and above. Furthermore, the higher one's intelligence, the more it could be used to maximize its power through calculation. Andre was now only a level 1 wandering swordsman. His close combat experience was pitiful. Even if he knew the theory, it was useless. After all, swordsmanship wasn't like weapons such as sabers, axes, spiked maces, and the like. It could be easily used with just a little bit of strength. It required a lot of practice over a long period of time, repeatedly, and fighting against various opponents to accumulate experience. Finally, one could slowly develop a technique that belonged to oneself. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.